Good morning. It is an early morning for me in Central Time Zone, and my friend and colleague Shannon is in Mountain Time Zone. So we are excited to be here. Like, it's still dark outside for me, very much so. But I was so thrilled to be here with you today. It was such a joy to get to work with you all, some of you a few months ago. So hopefully we're going to be building on some of the learning that we had before. So today's topic is blasting barriers to STEM careers. So we're going to be talking about what are some of the barriers that students face, what are the root causes for those barriers, and then we're going to brainstorm some strategies so we can begin to mitigate the ways in which these barriers affect our students. If you don't know who I am, my name is Meagan Pollock. I am based out of Dallas, Texas, and my company is called Engineer Inclusion. And so I help companies, organizations, teams intentionally and systematically engineer equity and inclusion into their organizations. And I have been focused, for the most part, on increasing the participation of women and people of color within STEM and engineering for the last 12 years or so. And I come to this as an engineer, so I know what it feels like to be a woman in industry, to be the only female in a class of 70 engineering students. And I used to work for Texas Instruments before I shifted gears from widgets to workshops, and I really haven't looked back since. And so I'm thrilled to be with you today. And I'm also really excited. Oh wait, Marcy has no sound. But you all, some of you can hear me, yeah? Okay, all right, good. I am really excited to introduce you to Shannon Dean. Now, it may be hard to believe, but I've known Shannon for 35 years, we think. Since like kindergarten or first grade. I don't think we went back. I don't know. Is it kindergarten? We should have talked about this, but
I think second grade.
Oh, second grade. Okay. So maybe 34-ish years then. And so Shannon is many things. She is a really talented artist, and she is an actor, and she's worked in education herself. And she's currently working as the executive director of the San Miguel Resource Center. I'm gonna let her tell us a little bit about herself, but I just wanted to point her out as part of our team today. She's going to be making sure that everything on Zoom runs smooth and that we can be as present and serve you in the best way that we can. Shannon, you want to say hi?
Yeah, sure. Hi. I'm currently sick, so apologies. Like Meagan said, I think we met in probably second grade and have known each other since then. We were in all of the same classes. I now live near Telluride, Colorado. It's absolutely fabulous, and I'm happy to be here today. It's great to meet you all.
Excellent. I'm going to turn off the sound here. Okay. Let's just do, I want to kind of give a sense of who's here. So tell us which of these best describes your role. If none of these do, tell us what that is in the chat. All right, we got 3 people. So you can see here at the top, it'll tell us how many people are in the poll. Good. So we got some others. Let's see what you all are sharing in the chat. Regional director, oh, ed tech coach, counselor, good. All right. Nice. I'm going to give everybody a few more minutes to sort of figure out Slido, because we are going to be using it a lot today. So again, you can scan the QR code here on the top left, open it up on a phone, or you can go to slido.com and then type in 002638. Excellent. Now, I want to sort of set us off in a really good positive tone today. And I want you to, oh, it looks like some people are still joining us here. Okay, good. I'm going to move us forward. So if you're just getting into it, you can add it in the chat. Oh, we got 12 people. All right, maybe I'm going to wait another more minute. Give everybody a chance to kind of figure it out. Okay. All right, so what I want you to think of now is I want you to share one great thing that has happened to you lately. And lately can be as relative or as specific as you want. It could be something that happened this morning, or it could be something that happened 3 months ago, but just something that feels great. So let's just start off with a positive tone. Something great that has happened to you lately. So again, it's the same QR code, so you don't have to open it again. It'll just refresh on that same browser page. Reading Firekeeper's Daughter, so good. Oh, you went to vacation in Florida. You're in-person schooling, yay. Time off to cook with your kids. What are you cooking? Who is that? Unmute and tell us what you're cooking.
Hi, it's Blaze. I don't know. What did I cook? A lot of muffins with my 3-year-old. Yeah.
With your 3-year-old. Wow, that's wonderful.
She's almost 4. She
great.
dumps.
Hey, you got to do that. And they feel, can she start measuring and things like that?
I don't think we're there yet.
Okay. Next steps. So you're having great talks with your son. Oh, you booked spring break. I don't know where Hocking Hills is, but I'm sure it's fabulous. Sledding with your daughter. You made a new friend. Listen, making new friends as an adult is super hard. So kudos to whoever did that. Especially new friends in a pandemic. It's hard to make friends when I never leave my little house here. Ooh, somebody got a great nap. A friend of mine called me yesterday and I couldn't talk, and I called them back and they apologized for taking a nap. And I was like, I think you deserve congratulations. If you get to lay down and take a nap, like there is no apology ever needed for that. COVID negative, that's great. Found out your daughter. Oh, you found out your daughter and husband are expecting a baby. That's so exciting. Look at all this great news.
You've got in the chat also.
Oh, we got more in the chat. Oh, somebody went skiing. That's so fun. All right. Well, hey, thanks for sharing good news with us. Oh, somebody's learning to meditate. So who's learning to meditate? Who's that?
I am, and it's a process. I'm not good at it.
Absolutely.
Well, so speaking of learning to meditate, we're going to take a minute to do that. Jennifer, do you want to lead us in a little meditation? Are you ready for that? So anybody here want to lead us in like a 1-minute meditation? Anybody do this with your students or family? Hey, there's no judgment here. All I want us to take is a minute to like breathe and like reset for the day. Anybody willing to do it? No takers? Okay, all right. What I want you to do is just kind of get as comfortable as you can. We're going to do this for about a minute. You're welcome to turn off your camera if you don't want to be seen while your eyes are closed and you're breathing. But I want you to get as settled as you can in your chair. Plant your feet on the ground. And I like to put my hands face up in my lap. It feels like a very open position. Kind of either close your eyes or soften your gaze, whatever is comfortable to you. And I want you to draw your attention to your breath. Together, we're going to do a series of really deep breaths in through our nose and out through our mouth. And you may have lots of things running through your brain, and that's really normal, but I want to challenge you to really think about feeling the air just coming in through your nose and feeling it out coming out through your mouth. So we're going to do some big breaths together. All right, breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. In through your nose and out through your mouth. One more. In and out. And keep breathing. But I want you to think about that one thing that you said that's happening that's good for you in your life lately. I want you to draw all of your energy, all of your thoughts. I want you to think about that thing and why you're so grateful for that. Now, what's something else that you're grateful for today? Now, as we go throughout this day, we fully acknowledge that it is hard to focus when we have jobs and responsibilities and so many things are pulling at us. And we want you to know that we have compassion and empathy for all of the challenges that you're facing. And our goal is to be present with you here, and we invite you to be present here with us today. And there's no shame in all the things that you're juggling. I'm going to take another deep breath in and deep breath out. And when you're ready, open your eyes back up and let's come back together. All right. Thank you for doing that with me. I think it's important to kind of give us a minute to attempt to de-stress a little bit. I think that all of us are carrying a lot, given this responsibilities, whatever it is that you have. And I know that it's impossible for us to set all those things aside to be here and to be in a learning environment today. And so I'm grateful that you've chosen to be here, and we're going to do our best to make it as fun as possible for you today. So let me tell you what we're going to do. Hopefully, we're going to drop the links in the chat. Again, these are the handouts that you'll have access to. And so the agenda, this is what Dre sent out before, but we're going to start this morning with a exercise thinking about our students' career journey. And then we're going to spend a couple of hours talking about barriers to STEM. So it will feel like a lot of content, but my strategy is to present it in a way that really sort of simplifies a lot of things. And then we're going to be thinking about how do we begin to consider the ways in which these root causes are affecting our students. We're going to do some strategic planning around these things. And then I've also got a case study for us to look at today as an application of all of it. And then we will end at 3:30. Now, after 2 years of doing virtual learning with adults, I have figured out that 50-minute segments are the best. So I'm going to give you lots of breaks, and I am pretty rigid about hitting those breaks because I want you to be able to depend on that time. If you need to check on something or make a phone call, that I'm going to be as good as I can about giving us the hook to like take time off for each of those 50-minute breaks. We will go from 11 to 12, so we won't have a 50-minute segment there because then we'll follow with a 1-hour lunch, and then we'll end with a 30-minute sort of reflective piece in the end. Okay, does that work for everybody? All right, good. Now, another kind of reminder that we're going to be thinking about is, you know, when we're talking about educational equity, it can feel really overwhelming. When we're talking about systemic inequities and injustice, it can feel even more overwhelming. But what I want to invite you to remember is that we make progress when we focus on what we can control and what we can influence, rather than on those things which we cannot. And I've been reading a book called The Daily Stoic. Anybody heard of it? I think Ryan Holiday is his name. And I've been reading about Stoicism for years, which is completely misunderstood. And interestingly enough, I've been giving Stephen Covey credit for this sphere of influence, but it actually goes back to the ancient Stoics. So when you think about what the Stoics believed, it's recognizing like, what can I control? And we can't control everything, but there are so many things that we care about and that we're concerned about. And a lot of times we get stuck in worry, and we get stuck in like thinking about like, it's all the things. And the answer is yes, it is. And especially today when we start to talk about the root causes, like it's gonna be all the things, but we have to sort of narrow it down and think about what can I control? What can I influence? And if we focus there, that's where we're going to make that's where we're going to make a difference. That's where we're going to make an impact. And so use that as like a tool to sort of reel yourself back in. Like if you feel yourself kind of getting stuck out here in those like areas of concern, remember like, what can I control? What can I influence? And let's hang out there, and then we'll make some progress. All right. Now, in your packet, there are a bunch of keywords that I'm going to be going over. Let's see. There it is. And the keywords that are in the document are for the most part, in order in which I'm going to be going through them. And so to start us off, the first keyword that I want to make sure that we clarify here is non-traditional career. Now, we're specifically here talking about STEM careers, but I will use this word a lot. And the word it's specifically from federal legislation from the Perkins, the Perkins legislation, and it talks about a non-traditional career. And so that is any one in which a single gender represents less than 25% of the total number of workers. And so there are non-traditional careers for women and men. So many of the STEM careers are non-traditional for women, specifically engineering, physics, computer science. Many of the biologies and many of the math careers, we've reached near parity in those. But when we talk about some of the more high demand STEM pathways, that is where women have persistently and consistently been underrepresented. And so again, you may hear me say this term, and I just wanted to make sure we've got it defined here. So non-traditional careers for women, this is not a comprehensive list, it's just some of the things. So for women, it could be an auto mechanic, electrician, computer scientist, law enforcement, HVAC, welding, and certainly engineering. Non-traditional careers for men, so it's massage therapy, nursing, early childhood education. And so that list is pretty comprehensive actually, but the women's list is not as comprehensive. And so again, you may hear me say that. Now, to start us off this morning, I'm going to have us thinking about the student career choice journey. Now, I'm going to prompt you with something. You're going to be like, what is she doing? But just hang with me here. Now, I want you to think about a brand that you love or a company that you love that you've been loyal to for a while. And I want you to think about your sort of journey as a customer. So think about a brand or a company that you love and that you've been loyal to. And like, what's your journey been like as a customer? So get something in your head, think about an example, and then share that here. So what's a brand or company that you've been loyal to and why? What's a brand that you're loyal to and why? So again, it's the same Slido page. It'll just refresh. Okay, Costco, affordable and good quality. Okay. What else? Higher Ground coffee. You like that it's ethically sourced, it's local, it tastes good. So Verizon, you like the quality, it's hard to change. Bowden, I've never heard of Bowden. Never heard of Cavu. Love their sling bags. Okay. Apple, yeah, like Apple has pretty good brand following. So Prana, y'all are teaching me all kinds of new things. Crest toothpaste, you use it your whole life. You're cavity filling free. That's pretty amazing. Family Fare, local employees relationships, lands and backpacks, their quality, they hold up well with kids. So we have these brands, we have these things, and they can be restaurants too, like restaurants that we're loyal to. There's somebody always says coffee when I do this, like there's always like a coffee brand that you either love or that you hate, right? Keen shoes, they fit and they last. Yeah, so like if I look over at my shoe rack, I have like a lot of pairs of Rothy's because I really like them and they're consistent, but I don't really wear shoes that much anymore because I never leave my house. So I don't really need them anymore, but like I'm loyal to them. Your hairstylist, that's a great one. My hairstylist, he's, there's nothing to style for my hair, but the guy that's been cutting my hair, he's been cutting my hair for 15 years. I have like flown into the country when I've lived abroad to have him cut my hair. I've had to follow him to all these different salons, like super loyal to him, right? Because there's trust, you know, you have that trust with them. Now, I want you to think on the flip side of it, think about a brand that you used to like, but you no longer do. And why is that? What's a brand that you used to like and you no longer do, and why? Brand or Chick-fil-A? Oh, listen, I hear that. Yeah. It's so bad, right? Because like they make a great chicken sandwich, but like I just can't go there. Georgina's. So what happened at Georgina's?
Georgina's was a really great local restaurant here in town. But it turns out that the owner was super sexist and sexually harassing his staff. So as much as I really enjoyed the food, I could no longer patronize the.
Yeah. Well, it's good that you found out, and that you could know that. Nike, that you found better options. I've been weirdly loyal to Nike for a lot of my life, but there are different options now. Like I do buy other things too. Fresh Coast Market, you don't agree with some of their choices the owner made. Have you all heard of like Penzeys spices? They're big in the news about being really vocal about standing up against bigotry and racism and things like that. So they attracted a lot of customers after that because of Stand, and I'm sure they lost some customers too. So we've got a couple here that are mentioning like customer service, right? So it either takes too long or people are rude, but it just turns us away. We don't want to be involved. And there are some places where there's in my neighborhood, like within walking distance, some restaurants, and I lived here for a while before they were even built, and I was so excited, like I wanted to love them. And this one restaurant's like Eno's Pizza. It's a kind of a chain here, like a local chain. And I wanted to love it, but every time I go, the service is horrific. And finally I'm like, I give up. Like, I can't do it. I want this to be my place, but like, there are just too many things that keep like turning me away and making me not want to be there. Now, the reason why I've asked you these questions is because as customers of different businesses, of different brands, we have a journey, right? And so some businesses and brands are thoughtful and strategic about it. Some are a little more like, we'll kind of see what happens. But customer journey maps, they help us to run businesses better, right? So rather than sort of guessing what our customer needs, we try to identify what they will need so that we'll know what they need. And then it helps businesses give it to them, right? So a customer journey map, it breaks down like a whole relationship with a business into individual phases. And it allows you to visualize the many small decisions that customers make along the way. Now, so you can narrow focus and deliver and the point is so that you can narrow focus and start to deliver the right resources at the right time. And ultimately, the point of the customer journey map is so that you can convert prospects to customers, to really loyal customers, right? And so if you look at the image here, this is just an example of a customer journey. And so it sort of starts with this awareness. And so how many of you have become a loyal customer of something that started out as an ad on Facebook? I think that's how I found out about Rothy's. Yeah, so Holly Ann, she's got an example, yeah. So it started out as an awareness of like, oh, this brand exists. And then there was something that made you move to this sort of consideration stage. And so maybe you started looking at reviews, maybe you started looking at some of the media that they created, and then you purchase it. And so what's that experience like? If you think about some of the brands that you like, what happens when you get something? So one of my new brands that I really like are Tilly hats. It's a Canadian company, and they just make really good hats that last forever, and they have a lifetime warranty. And I just ordered some new ones because they were on sale. And I'll put one on later to model for you. But I opened it and it had like the tissue paper and the little sticker on it. So it was a whole experience, right? And so that's part of the customer journey of not only what are you purchasing, but like, what does it feel like to get the package, to open the package? How do they communicate with you as the package is on its way to you? And then the service, right? So like if I need help and I need to reach out to their website, how accessible is it? Are they responsive? Another brand that I sort of like is like Purple. Like they make mattresses. I've not bought a mattress yet, but I like their cushions and I love their pillows. But I recently experienced some trouble with their service because like they sent me the wrong pillow and it was like a $200 pillow. So like I want the pillow I ordered, right? But somehow I got caught in their customer relationship management system. So I was having conversations with multiple people about a single problem. It was very frustrating for me. In the end, I won because I got to keep all the pillows. But so that's a good, helpful thing, right? But I was confused. I'm like, why am I talking to two different people about the same thing? So they kept sending, now I have 3 pillows because everyone's talking to me. So that's an error on their part. But instead of saying like, you have to send us this pillow back, right? Which would have really frustrated me. They're just like, just keep the pillows, right? So they're trying to keep my brand loyalty. They see like Meagan's bought a lot of these cushions. Now she's buying pillows. Next, she's going to buy the mattress. So again, they're trying to keep me moving along. Now, another way of looking at this, here's another example of really seeing the sort of flow that you move through. Now, it's not just the purchases. How are they retaining you? And then how do you become a salesperson like me? Now y'all are going to go Google Purple. You're going to go Google Tilly hats because you're going to be like, well, Meagan talked about it. Let's see how great it is. Like that's advocacy, like that's what you want for your customers. So now let's see what this has to do with our students. Now I want you to think about what are the touch points on the journey to a STEM career. So just like we have a journey to being a customer, to being a loyal advocate of something, our students have a journey to any kind of career. And specifically today, we're talking about a STEM career. So we're going to have a conversation here and an exercise in a minute on this. And this is where we're moving to. So a student career choice journey map, it's an illustration. It's an illustration of the full student journey across major and minor touch points. Now, the purpose of it is to portray the student's experience in different phases and intensities. So a student career map is a holistic approach to understanding the experience flow a student has in their journey towards a non-traditional career or a STEM career is what we're focused on today. So there could be lots of touch points. There could be the application process, the registration process. I think about, so after I like to learn. So after I finished my doctorate, I was wanting to take some business classes here at the Dallas County Community College. And you'd think it would be easy to register. It was very hard. I guess they don't have a lot of people with PhDs that register for community college, maybe, I don't know. But they wanted me to take a Texas success test. And I was like, can this count for that? So like, it was really hard to get someone on the phone. It took me 13 phone calls to get someone to talk to me, right? Now, one could say I'm a professional student. And so I had a lot of self-efficacy that allowed me to be persistent in that. But that's a huge barrier. If our students have to beg someone to talk to them, just to apply, just to get registered, those barriers are too great. So if I had not had the confidence I had in educational systems, I would have just moved on, right? Now, you've also got the touch points in advising. You've got the courses that they take. What's the student's experience in those courses, like with the teacher, with the classmates? You've got community events that are happening, special programs that you offer, whether they are, for, Society of Women Engineers, or whether you've got special programs that are incentivizing students to scholarship kinds of programs. You've got all kinds of things that it could be. So we're going to go into our first breakout here in a second, and we're going to work in small groups to brainstorm all of the influences on a student's career choice journey. And then you're going to get to design an illustration. So for those of you who are super creative types, you're going to love this. If you're not, I'm going to challenge you to be as creative as you can. And so how we're going to do this is we're going to use our what I call digital chart paper. So Shannon has put the links in the chat. And so you're going to open it up, and it's just a Google document. And I've created a template for you. And you'll see here in the slide notes, I have the instructions for us. And I've created a sort of set of stages for you to consider. You can change these. This is just something to start you thinking. And I want you to identify some of the influencing elements. So what are the people? Who are the people? The related processes, the environments for each of these kinds of elements and stages. And so actually, I will drop in the examples of the customer journey map. So I'll drop those in there so you can kind of have visualization as well. And so when we go into breakout rooms, we're going to put you into probably groups of like 3 or 4. And again, once you start to kind of brainstorm here, what I want you then to do is to make an illustration. You can add a new slide. It doesn't have to be on the same slide. So you can add a new slide. You can do whatever you want. If there's another application that you love, make it in that, and then just put a link so that we can see it, or copy an image of it or something like that. And so you've got the instructions in the chat. So if you get lost, you've always got that. This exercise is also in your handout. And so if you like to write on paper, it's there as well. And so let me get the breakout rooms ready to go. Okay. So I'm going to give us 11 minutes. So we'll come back at break, check in. If we need to go back, we'll go back into our groups. And if you have questions, you can pop back out. You can move into other rooms if you need to, but again, you got the instructions here in the bottom of the digital chart paper and in the chat. So we'll see you back in 11 minutes. Can't wait to see what you create. You got more time, but 11 minutes to get us started before the first break. Okay. Welcome back, everyone. I know that you may not have been done, and that's okay. So hopefully you got as far as you did. I want to give us a chance to report out a little bit about your conversations. As I did my best to sneak into your rooms to listen, you were having some really awesome and rich conversations. And so what I do want to do is I've got 4 groups. So I want to go through each of the 4 groups and just give you a few minutes to sort of report out and share the sort of gist of your student journey. And then as we go through, if what you created is similar to someone else, that's awesome. Let's add on to some of the things that maybe weren't already said. So let's start with group 1. So that's Danelle, Ashley, Shelley, and Lauren. Do you all want to tell us first about your student journey? Oh, that's not what I want. Am I showing you the right screen? You're seeing the slides? Okay.
Yep. Ashley, you're up. Where'd he go? Oh, there you are.
I was trying to find the unmute button. Sorry. Okay. Yeah, so we were group 1, I guess. So with awareness, we kind of start with that family experience a little bit. A lot of times we learn from those people closest to us, also with school and neighbors. But just learning your own personal strengths and what skills and talents and abilities you have as a person, kind of going through that early purple stage of just awareness and consideration, finding out what you don't want to do, we thought was just as important as finding out what you do want to do. listening to those valued people, whether it's your teachers or counselors, and getting into different internship and volunteer opportunities. Just finding out what the world's like out there in different ways. Once we get into a little bit more of the selection, their research, such a big thing now, especially with students, access to the internet and different things like that. Visiting, just different colleges, job sites, and again, some of those internship or job opportunities there with that. Moving into experience, similar to the selection process is all part of that, I guess. But as far as retention, we thought, being treated with respect, feeling valued and listened to is important. But also nothing's ever, all the way easy. So being able to face adversity, persevering through those tough times, and then the ability to resolve conflicts as you're working with different people and groups, and just, learning on the job and things of that nature, and struggles through school. Completion, we thought financial ability. Many STEM jobs now need education past high school, so paying for schooling, financial ability there, access to those kinds of things. And everyone needs support sometime, so supports from other individuals in your life. Entry, especially in STEM, the soft skills, you can learn to code and different things like that, but being able to relate to others and communicate effectively is something that employers are looking for. And I think that's something that can give people a leg up, are those soft skills. And then just your attitude as far as being a lifelong learner and having a good attitude. And you can't discount good luck. Being in the right place at the right time, meeting the right person in an elevator, whatever it might be. And then kind of moving to experience again, we talked about the phrase, people don't quit jobs, they quit managers. So that manager and boss experience is important, and just having that right, kind of occupation setting. And then with retention, finally, being treated with respect, feeling valued and listened to, and then finally, ability for advancement as well. And we also talked about being equitable, not only in pay, but in different aspects as well.
All right, thanks group number one. Thank you. All right, so let's go to group number two. Drea, Britt, and Jennifer, give us an overview of your STEM career journey.
Yeah, so we were talking about, also very similar and also like just different analogies. So I'll just say, like, for those of you who've seen Made in Manhattan, there's a line in there that says it's not about like what you got, it's about who you know and what they got. So a lot of it's about awareness and like how you can connect to people, and like where do the careers actually make the connection. So like, for example, TCAPS is tying all their course catalog to the career pathways as a resource. Like, that's really powerful. And it's also really powerful of having the connections with like those conversations with teachers over where the students are and how best to funnel them through that vein of like what might be appropriate, just given the water cooler conversations happening. And then like consideration, like using those conversations to help those kids in consideration, like, have you been to the career tech like visits? Have you actually like tested it out? Have you, like, what in those Zello lessons, like what has been bubbling up as an interest for you? And like really trying to hone in on that, and then selection of like, once again, using the teachers to help select, and you know, maybe they attend a a tech program, or maybe they choose classes that align with what their interests are in that vein. And then we really wanted experiences. So like, if the world of COVID was not current, we would be like, let's do job shadows, and let's do apprenticeships, and let's do career internships. Let's get the kids like to roll up their sleeves and actually like get in there and have genuine conversations about what it's like to be in this career. And like what some of the hangups are. I use the example of one of the MTU or MTA students a while back was really interested in like nuclear energy, which was super cool, but no one had asked her about like what the lifestyle, or no one had educated her about what the lifestyle of that was. And so like, there's only certain places in the United States where you can live. You can't have a husky, you need to have like a fat chihuahua type thing, or like those kind of conversations as well. And then being able to look at retention, like, do you have the academics? Are you working like with employers in these work experiences that have, you know, are able to offer the grace and humility when you know, you take responsibility for mess ups? You know, in the interviewing process, like, are you asking good questions? And we use salary as an example of like, it's okay to ask about salary in that interview process. And, you know, if they have a reaction to that might be a red flag about their cultural expectancy in that space. And then being able to look at like, have you applied for completion? Like, have you decided to go on a STEM path? Like Ashley said, we want kids to be informed. If you've decided that STEM isn't for you, great. We've helped you make an informed decision. If you've decided STEM is for you, awesome. Where does this make the most sense to help you on your journey? You know, applying for programs, college, trades, apprenticeships, etc. Because there's just not one pathway to that. And then, you know, once they're in there, like, what are, like Ashley said, what is the attendance and pursuing the post-secondary options? Like, you know, what are those things that you're thinking about from a work perspective? And like, are you actually getting it? Like, if you want to be a doctor, you should probably like get a job within the healthcare field so you can see what all the different options are, not just the doctor one. Because like, you don't start off with the salary of a doctor right off the bat. Like, there's a whole journey of, you know, education, in addition to like making sure that you're making the best decision for you. And what that journey looks like you need to know that it's there, as opposed to when kids, you know, move out of your parents' house for your first time and realize that you're not going to have the same lifestyle when you first move out of your parents' house. And then like experience with that first job, like what sacrifices are you going to have to make along the way? And then what it takes to actually get to that end game again, of like what career you want, and which is very similar to what we just talked about for what does that look like? And then retention, again, like looking at company culture, looking at the employer and grace and humanity again, of like, is this a space we want to be? And I use the example of Hassan Minhaj has a section on the dark side of the gaming industry, and he talks about how like typically the max like career is like 5 years. And so if you went all, and you need a bachelor's degree to get in there, but so if you go through all the schooling and then your career is only 5 years long, you're going to need a different game plan, and you should probably know what you're getting into. And like, there's a dark side of that because they just wear you out. Like, there's a reason why the maximum is like 5 years. More often it's 3. So overview, that's that. We didn't have a nice shiny infographic, but yeah.
That's good. Thank you. Thanks. You know, listen, a table is just as clear to some people as a graphic. Awesome. So let's go to group 3. So Ashley, Danielle, Kelly, and Ginger, tell us a little bit about your student journey.
I would love for any of my group members to jump in, but I'm happy to be the fall person if I need to. Danielle, do you want to talk?
So we just kind of looked at our own personal experiences and what we've been through to get to where we are, and just came up with like a bunch of questions. I can't really see my screen. So we just like you know, what did we go through? How were we influenced to get to where we are? And the thing that came to us, like just kind of a light bulb moment, was like, it's a hurdle. Everything is a hurdle to get to where we are. Whether you were influenced by somebody in school or not, if you had a female teacher that was in science or math, and if that led you to like being driven into the next part of the step. I don't know, what else, Ginger?
Yeah, we created a list of questions in the table that would kind of correspond to all of these, and they're just questions like, did my parents talk to me about STEM careers? You know, what did I see in the media? Do I feel like I belong? And so I think that all of these questions are ones that students, non-traditional students, so it could be women, it could be people of color, ask themselves along the way. It's a complex thing because students can get into a career, but are they going to stay? What is their experience in college? Did they have a professor that looked like them? And then some of the things that were mentioned already, like once they get a job in the field, are they passed over for promotions? Are they recognized for their work? Is the company family friendly? We spent a bit of time talking about, you know, what does it look like to have a family in this career? And is there daycare available? Do I have an extended family around that can support me in those types of things? So those things really matter. First generation college students start way behind other students whose parents went to college. And so it's not just a matter of getting somebody into a major in college. It's a matter of providing supports that level the playing field, or that like help students who, and small things like, did you take the right class as a freshman? So you have your prereq, so you can take the next class when you need to, so that you can graduate in 4 years. Or even other things like, do you have to work 40 hours a week to afford to be in college? So the classes you take, you're going to have to, you know, find time to, it's just that there's so many things. Do you have food in college? Like, can you eat? So anyway, it's complicated. So there's lots of great things there.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Thanks, Danielle and Ginger, for presenting for your team. And so the last group, we want to go to group 4. So give us a couple-minute overview of your table and chart, and then that will set us up for our next break, and then we'll come back and then move forward with the next topic. So group 4, Holly Ann, Melissa, and Blaze, tell us what you got. They love Shelly and Drea, so I need to hear more about this. So Blaze, Holly Ann, or Melissa, you want to share? You can unmute and.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Oh yeah, so I'm totally
Okay.
talking.
Go ahead, Holly Ann.
Yeah, sorry, I was talking and talking and talking, and I'm like, why is she talking? So sorry. I started saying I just drew the short straw, so I'm gonna jump in here. And as far as Shelly and Drea, I thought it was really interesting that we had, you know, 3 different people in our group that had 3 different roles in their careers, and we were all like, hey, Shelly and Drea are awesome because they offer so many tools for each of us. And we kind of missed that the bottom part of the chart was STEM career. So we really concentrated on the STEM pathway, and the awareness was really the tools that Shelly and Drea provide to us as far as speakers and opportunities to expose our students, as well as brochures. A lot of this will be a repeat, like the Career Tech Center brochure, you know, whatever ISD you're in, it seems to be a common thing. Consideration to help the students consider what STEM pathway they'd want to go to. There's visits at different locations, or even people coming in to talk to the students using Zello. Selection, there's always the aptitude tests and the interest testing that happens. I know the Scantron is a little out of date, but I think you get the idea. Again, the experience for the students, to provide the students with the experience to actually meet people and see and do. Shelly and Drea support that. They are amazing. But also, you know, we're talking about internships or job shadows, whether it's like a a one-day visit to a facility or a business, or, you know, an 80-hour, 160 hours where a student will spend a summer somewhere. I think the retention and the completion, they really kind of go hand in hand. We just talked about the communication with a student, really building those relationships and talking to the students, offering them supports where they struggle, whether, you know, it be academic or maybe it's social, emotional, kinds of things, but really building that relationship and talking to the student to support them in what they're thinking. And I heard somebody say they came, they saw, they decided it's not for them. That's totally great. We see that. That's kind of part of that, not really retention, but it's empowering the student to make an informed decision. And then the entry into the workplace, you know, I have a LinkedIn group that connects the alumni with business partners, and that last one is internships. I think of the photo of the kids saying yay, and just really praising them and letting them know what opportunities are out there. So that's it in a nutshell. I think we're on time for a break.
Yeah, Holly-Ann, thank you so much. And I didn't realize I was actually coming to meet with Shelly Andreas fan club today, so that's amazing. Yeah, so what we are going to be talking about in the next hour is we're going to start talking about barriers. And so you might find that some of the things that you talked about and learned, some of the things that we might sort of begin to think are some of the reasons aren't actually root causes. And so we're going to learn to dig a little deeper and look at some of the research and some of what the literature tells us about, you know, what are the reasons why people don't enter into, participate, complete, or persist in these STEM pathways. And so we're gonna, for the next hour, you're gonna work with a different group, but you're gonna come back to this group because once we learn a little bit about root causes, you're gonna come back and sort of see how they map to what you've drawn here. So you're not done with this group yet. But for now, we're going to take a 10-minute break, encourage you to get up and stretch and take care of yourself. And we will see you back in 10 minutes. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. Hopefully you were able to stretch and refuel during the break. I want to turn the mic over to Shelly. She had something that she wanted to share with you.
Yeah. Thanks, Megan. Actually, I just wanted to say I was so excited to get online this morning and see all these awesome people because I've worked with just about everybody on here. And just actually also to see the comments, you know, that people are using some of the stuff that Dre and I are working on. I'm not gonna lie that sometimes I'm kind of like, are we making any progress? Are we doing anything? And just to hear that people are using those and relying on those is it was really great to hear, but we certainly can't do those without the awesome people that are doing this stuff. And I really do value all the people that are on here and all the other people that I work with. And it's just such an exciting, fantastic thing to do. And I love what I do. So anyway, I just want to say thanks. So.
I feel like we're just sitting in like a circle of gratitude here. Thank you. We need to all express gratitude and thanks more often, right? So like, you know, especially in the work around educational equity, because it can feel like a beatdown sometimes, you know, and like we're not getting enough feedback. And so I'm so pleased that you've taken time to support one another and cheering each other on through this work. It makes a difference. All right, so let's move forward. We're gonna start connecting some dots here, but a couple of key points first. You know, as we look at the journeys that our students have as they're selecting their careers, as they're moving through education, as we begin to look at these next set of root causes, there are two things I want us to focus on. First is that our students, they are not broken. People aren't broken, right? So what we're going to be talking about today, like we want to not fix our people, but we want to fix our systems. We want to focus on what are the things that we can change in our systems, how can we change our institutions, and certainly they're made up of people. And so some of it still may need to change, but that doesn't mean we're broken, right? And so what we're going to be focusing on for the rest of the day is in what ways can we acknowledge and remove barriers and then add the supports that students need to be successful and to find themselves into hopefully a STEM career. All right. Now, to get us sort of warmed up in this, I want you to brainstorm a little bit. I'm going to throw a Slido back up here in a second. But the question I have for you is to think about, so what are some of the barriers to access and success in non-traditional, or it says CTE, I'm sorry, it needs to say STEM. But so what are some of the barriers to access and success in STEM pathways and careers? So correct that to STEM. And so you've already addressed some of those things, but we're just going to get those neurons firing so we can build on some of those things over the next couple of hours. Think about what are the barriers to access and success in STEM pathways and careers. So if you're joining us, grab a smartphone if you have one. If not, go to your browser to slido.com, open up the camera app, hold the camera app over the QR code, it'll pop up a little bubble, and then you can keep that open for the rest of the Slidos. Okay, so somebody says a barrier is awareness, okay? Lack of exposure, lack of confidence, support, feeling like an outsider, small schools. So Shannon and I were reflecting at the beginning of one of your breakouts so we grew up in a really rural small town, and we had a pretty extraordinary education for a really small town. And I was asking her, because I haven't actually seen Shannon in 20 years, by the way, until today. She was just filling in to help me with something. But I asked her, I said, in all the years that you talk to people, have you ever met anyone who had an education like ours? And she said she hadn't. And what was so unique about ours is that we had from first grade on a completely separate cohort of like the plus or the honors class. And so we were completely separate from everyone else. And so for the most part, our entire education was project-based learning in this small town of, like 15,000 people. And it was remarkable, right? And so even though we had a small school, we had so many unique opportunities. But then when I talked to my brothers who weren't in that system, their education was totally different, right? And so a lot of it is sort of that luck of, having access to that. And so small schools can certainly be really limiting to what courses, who do they have available to teach? Got opportunities here, family support, whether it's in the core curriculum, feeling like you don't belong. We're going to be talking about that today too. Many cases, the teachers of STEM courses aren't diverse. In many cases, teachers aren't diverse enough to fully reflect the population that we serve. Having physical transportation to expose them to different opportunities, community perceptions and expectations, whether the courses are offered. Again, you'll have to forgive me, I'm reflecting a lot on my high school experience because Shannon's here today, but what was so unique again about our experience is I had programming. So I'm 39 and I had programming from 8th grade through high school. That is remarkable for my age in a really small town. And it's because we had one teacher, Miss Passmore, who was like, I'm going to learn how to program and I'm going to teach these kids how to do it. And she just kept doing it. It's because of one woman and a passion to teach kids these things. And so that's how it was offered to us, right? And I think a lot of times in small schools, that's how it happens as well. So again, that connects to lack of access. The labeling of students, yes. The bias approach for who can be involved and who can handle the content. I didn't mean to skip that through. Okay. Oh yes, so freshman year failure. So when I think about all the students that I mentor, one of the things I say is you can't blow off that first year, because that first year, even college or high school, because it sets such a tone for what your end GPA is going to be. It's so important. All right, you all have come up with lots and lots of barriers. So we're going to be building on these as we go through and look at the literature. So thank you for contributing to that. Now, the model that I'm going to use and how I'm going to introduce some of the root causes. Now, again, I'm going to introduce some of the root causes. There are so many root causes, but these are the ones that the research sort of really bubbles to the top as some of the most prevalent ones when it comes to participation, completion, and persistence within STEM pathways. And I have overlaid those 10 or mapped them to the 4I model. So it's the 4 I's of oppression. And I'm doing that intentionally because I want us to begin to see and connect how these root causes that are the barriers that our students are facing are connected to systemic inequities, right? To systemic sort of visioning. I want us to really move past that, like what's happening between, Shannon and Ms. Passmore. It's not just that connection. It's what's happening at the school, what's happening a little bit bigger and bigger and bigger. Now, certainly those interpersonal things matter as well, but I want us to, again, start to see the sort of bigger picture of the ways in which barriers are affecting our students. And so we're going to dig into this over the next bit. And I have to apologize. My dog just finally woke up and now she needs to go out. So give me just 1 second. Let me open the door for her. Thank you for that. I have an old girl. She's 14. We've already been at the ER once this week. We have had a exciting week so far. So to get us started, I want you to think about what is a root cause. Now get your wheels spinning. I'm going to throw another Slido up here. But how would you describe a root cause to a 4-year-old? Now I'm asking for this specifically because it reduces the pressure to have a really academic answer. So how would you describe and define a root cause to a 4-year-old? What does it mean? How would you define a root cause to a 4-year-old? Who's got a 4-year-old or who remembers talking to a 4-year-old about a root cause? So we got asking why, and there isn't another why to ask. Ooh, you are ahead of the game. This is exactly what we're going to do today. The reason something happens, how something started, when you ask why. Wait, have you all heard me teach this before? Because this is what we're doing today. Excellent. The why, absolutely. So you got it. So it's like the taproot on a dandelion. It grows the whole plant. I love that. That's beautiful. All right. Yeah, so it is the cause effect. It's the one thing that a change would change many things. Yeah, I like that. That's great. Any other ideas? All right, good. So the root cause, and again, these key terms are in your packet. It is the core issue. It is the highest level cause that sets in motion the entire cause and effect reaction that ultimately leads to the problem or the problems. And so we are going to watch a really short video here that is going to sort of explain what a root cause is and why we need to determine what those root causes are. Let me make sure I've got sharing here. All right.
How often do you ask why? And when you do, how often are you satisfied with the first response? If you've ever had a conversation with a young child, do they commonly accept the first response?
Try to leave it. Don't pull it off.
Why?
Because it needs to heal.
Why?
That's your body's way of healing itself.
Why?
Because you're a strong boy.
Why?
And the body is a miracle.
Why?
And resilient.
Why?
Researchers have explored why young children ask so many why questions and conclude that children are motivated by a desire for explanation. Results indicate that when preschoolers ask why questions, they're not merely trying to prolong the conversation, they're trying to get to the bottom of things. When it comes to issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, we've got to keep asking why. If we don't keep asking why, we won't get to the bottom of things. We need to find the root cause. The root cause is the core issue, the highest level cause that sets in motion the entire cause and effect reaction that ultimately leads to the problem or problems. Too often, we fall flat when we see the symptoms and problems and we just stop there. For example, let's take a look at a tree and consider non-traditional careers and pathways. A non-traditional career is one in which a single gender represents less than 25% of the total number of workers. What we see first are the symptoms like participation, performance, persistence. If we look a little deeper, we can identify some problems like awareness and interest. But the root cause is the why. Why aren't students interested or persisting? Some causes can include culture and climate, access, opportunity, policies, bias, and stereotypes. There are many root causes for inequities in education and in the workforce, and they often work together in complex ways. Until we verify and deeply examine the root causes for our particular population, we won't fully understand why we see the symptoms and problems that we do. So what can you do? Well, first, read the research, understand the root causes. Next, make a hypothesis of which root causes might be at play. And finally, conduct a root cause analysis to identify and verify underlying causes and barriers before you dive in with an intervention. A root cause analysis is a structured process that assists in identifying underlying factors or causes of an adverse event. Understanding the contributing factors or causes of a system failure can help develop actions that sustain the correction. Otherwise, we keep trying things, burning our time, energy, and budgets on solutions that don't address the root cause. So remember, act like a child and don't stop asking why until you get to the bottom of things.
All right. So how many of you have ever had a conversation with a 4 or 5-year-old that went a little bit like Pinks did with her son? Yes. Yeah. So it's exactly how we do this, right? Like we want to get to the bottom of things. Now, there are some really complex ways to do cause effect analyses. And so one of the things that we're going to do later is we're going to try to think about how we could do a root cause analysis for the populations that you're specifically serving in Michigan. But what I want to highlight here is that so often we see those symptoms, right? We see the problems and we stop. Like they're not interested. Well, interest is not a root cause. It is not a root cause. It is a reflection of lots of other things that have contributed to that. So a student, particularly people who have been either sort of enculturated or engendered to think like that's not for me, that's a result of so many other things that have affected that. They truly could be interested. They truly could want to pursue these kinds of things, but they have been conditioned to think that's not for me. That's not appropriate for my gendered stereotype. That's not for someone who's from my neighborhood. My parents don't do that, so how could I do that? So again, lots of root causes. And so that's what we're going to really dig into as we move forward. So the next thing I want to really sort of build out a little bit is to talk about the 4 I's of oppression. And so I do have another video in a second that I love. It's stop motion, so it's really cute. But it's going to introduce those 4 I's. But I want to make sure that we look at the sort of key definitions of what we're talking about. So first of all, oppression is the combination of prejudice and power, which creates a system that then can discriminate against some groups and it can benefit other groups. So examples of these systems are racism, sexism, heterosexism, ableism, classism, ageism, or anti-Semitism, which is what we've been experiencing here in Dallas over the last week. And so a dominant group, so that is the group which typically holds or wields the most power in a given society. And so, while the subordinate groups, so those who are the non-dominant groups, those are the ones who lack power compared to that dominant group. And so the sort of classic sociological definition of a dominant group is one with power, privileges, and social status. So another definition, a related definition, is a social group that controls the value system and rewards in a particular society. So the dominant group is often in the majority, but not necessarily. So systems of oppression, and that's what we're going to be talking about to sort of frame our conversation, they then enable the dominant groups to exert control, either consciously or not, over non-dominant groups by limiting their rights, their freedoms, and access to basic resources such as healthcare, education, employment, and housing, or in what we're talking about today, careers. And so there are 4 types of oppression: ideological, interpersonal, institutional, and internalized. Now, these systems overlap and they interact. And these systems are designed by people and upheld by people. And so in this little video, I want you to kind of tune in and pay attention. In your handout, you have definitions of the 4 I's. And so you'll have this for your notes. And then so right after we watch the video, I'm going to put you into breakout rooms to new rooms. We'll reshuffle you. And I'm going to give you just a few minutes to really reflect on those 4 I's. So I do want to set up the activity so you know what I'm going to be asking you to do. And so for this exercise, we're going to go into a Padlet this time. And so you're going to reflect on the question is, in what ways does each form of oppression present barriers to STEM, and for whom? So I want you to think about these things. Now, I gave you a list already, and we're going to go over that list, but I don't want you to be limited by that. I just want you to, again, sort of stretch your mind and think about what you already know and what you've already talked about and how it could relate to these. So that'll be part of it, just a really quick discussion I want so that you can process what you're going to learn here in just a second. Okay. All right.
Oppression. It's a word that's often used as a blanket term, but there's actually a whole lot more to it. There are 4 interlocking aspects of oppression: ideological, institutional, interpersonal, and internalized. And it might seem like a small difference, but it's very important to be able to distinguish between each kind, because understanding oppression is the first step to fighting it. Let's start with the core at the heart of every form of oppression: ideology. Every system of oppression comes from the idea that one group is somehow better than another. Ideological oppression starts when the dominant group associates positive qualities with itself and negative qualities with the marginalized or othered group. Ideological oppression describes the deeply ingrained social root of inequality. It's the larger overarching idea that leads to the isms. For example, the idea that black people are dangerous is ideological racism. The idea that poor people are lazy is ideological classism. Ideological oppression leads to institutional oppression. Institutional oppression is the way that systems and institutions manifest the dominant ideology. Institutions control access, who is able to get to what and how. This includes legal rights, police practice, access to medical care and education, public policy, political power, and media representation. For example, when women make 2/3 of what men make, that's institutional sexism. When a building is constructed without wheelchair ramps, that's institutional ableism. All of this leads to interpersonal oppression. Interpersonal oppression is probably the easiest to recognize because it happens all around us. Interpersonal oppression is the way that people play out discrimination and violence on each other. It can take the form of microaggressions, jokes, stereotypes, and harassment. For example, when a student is bullied for being gay, it's interpersonal homophobia. When a Muslim person is told that they're a terrorist, it's interpersonal Islamophobia. And all those forces, ideological, institutional, and interpersonal, lead to internalized oppression. Internalized oppression is the way that people with marginalized identities internalize narratives of their own inferiority. It's what leads people to feel less than. This is the end goal of oppression. The oppressive party doesn't need to exert force any longer because the marginalized group is enacting oppression on itself to maintain the status quo. It's important to remember that it's never a marginalized person's fault that they feel internalized oppression. It's simply what happens when someone faces negative stereotypes, low expectations, and ongoing discrimination. So, for example, an immigrant feeling embarrassed about having an accent is internalized xenophobia. When a trans woman feels that they can never be a real woman, that's internalized transphobia. So, to review, the 4 I's of oppression are ideological, institutional, interpersonal, and internalized. Each of these types are interconnected and completely supported by the others. They can never exist on their own and can even be seen as a cycle. Now that you understand the different kinds of oppression, you're even more equipped to fight it. Don't forget that any effort to dismantle oppression should aim to address it at all 4 of these levels. Thanks for watching. Oppression.
All right, so you're going to open up the 4I discussion Padlet. And so we're going to drop the instructions here in the chat for you. Let me find those.
Hey there.
You got them? Okay, great. Excellent. So you're going to open up the 4I discussion Padlet, and it's going to look like this. If you've never used Padlet, oh, you're going to love it. It's such a fun tool. So I have 4 columns here. The instructions are going to be on the left. And you can see the 4I definitions in your handout. To add a comment, you just click the plus sign, and there are 2 parts to it. There's a subject, and then there is a body, more information. You can add images, files, pictures, links, whatever. You can change the color of it if you want, and then you publish it. And then if you like what someone says, you can vote on it. You can comment directly. And then you can drag it around if you need to move it. And so we're all going to be working here on the same Padlet. And so again, the goal of this quick breakout is just to give you some space to process the 4 I's, and then we're going to dig deeper and continue to learn more about them. All right. So I've got the breakout room set up. Let me, I'm going to set a timer so that we've got I'll give you about 10 minutes to talk through that. And then, all right, we'll see you back. Any questions before we go? Okay, great. This is a good group, they're good thinkers.
Yeah.
All right, welcome back, everyone. So let's have a little sort of discussion. We don't need to do necessarily direct report outs from every room, but I do want to just open the floor for any aha moments that you had when thinking about the ways in which barriers happen and these different forms of oppression. Any aha moments or sort of salient points from your conversations that you'd like to share?
I guess one thing with our group, in trying to determine which category they were to go in, we really saw the ability for them to overlap, because there was a couple times we're like, well, it's a little bit of this, oh, it's a little bit of that. So yeah, we definitely saw how they can correlate and overlap with one another.
Excellent. Yeah. And exactly, like they interact, they overlap, they are all sort of part of one another, because at the end of the day, like people are part of all of these systems, and it's people who are enacting them, and then they can be embedded in our systems for sure. Yeah. Thanks, Lauren. What else? What else came up?
We also talked a little bit about like the lack of access kind of plays into like Lauren said, it kind of overlaps, but institutionally, like some of the smaller schools or rural schools have less options in the school or in the area for them to do. But then we also talked about how, that kind of becomes internalized because sometimes they feel like forgotten about, or, like we're not significant enough to, have people invest in us. So there's kind of some overlap in that too.
Yeah, thanks.
And just as a counselor, I think those connections to school are so important to student success and connectivity to school. And when they don't have those accesses, just that connection and just everything to do with school is at a deficit, I feel.
Yeah, thanks, Ashley. Anything else before we dive in a little deeper on all the root causes?
I just wanted to share that, I had shared this in my small group, but because all these pile up, and then like when you get to the internalized piece, like the imposter syndrome, like of like, do I even belong here? Can I even do this? Like Michelle Obama and her Becoming was really good, both in the book and in the Netflix show, of being able to speak to that. And like, you know, I've had to walk students through, yeah, you can do this. Like, it's like, there are some systems in place that are going to struggle, and you're going to have to figure out if you want to deal with that. And also like, you're like, if you look at the technicality of everything, you're better than others in your classroom. And that can be a really tricky spot, because they just don't see themselves because of their own imposter syndrome of like, yes, I am successful in this spot. Like, and that's a little heartbreaking.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, it's so, you know, and we'll continue to talk about the internalized, but as it said in the video and it says in the notes, like, we often can get stuck on the ways in which students have internalized people have internalized these messages. But we always have to remember that even though we can address it as a root cause, it isn't the root cause, right? The root cause is, it's always going to come back to those ideologies. It's always going to come back to those core beliefs that are then embedded in things. And so, you know, when our students create these sort of self-determining ideas, and we're going to talk a little bit about today about self-efficacy and mindset and stereotype threat, and how that affects our sort of self-determination of whether we can or can't do something. Again, it's still influenced by all of these external things. And so we can address those specifically, but we ideally want to begin to challenge those deeply rooted cultural stereotypes that are so persistent. Excellent. Well, let's dig in a little deeper and get started on this. So we're going to first start with the ideological. So as we said, ideological is that foundation of the 4 I's. So it's the idea that one group is superior to another. And so ideologies, they create this sort of dominant narrative of like an us versus them culture. And so examples could be, and you shared these in the Padlet, you know, like that men are smarter or more math inclined than women. That's an ideology. Or that low income people don't work hard. That's an ideology. Or that all relationships are between men and women. So those are some examples of ideologies. So certainly there are many more. But when we think about, we're going to talk specifically about stereotypes and prejudice. And so I'll give you a couple of definitions here. Again, these are in your packet. But stereotypes, and this is different than stereotype threat, which we're going to talk about later on the internalized piece of this. But stereotypes, these are these widely held, fixed, oversimplified, generalized images or ideas of a particular type of person or thing, right? So it can include personal traits or circumstantial attributes. And these stereotypes, they can become ideological beliefs that are held within one's culture that can lead to assumptions about characteristics, behaviors, and social norms. And so I love the quote by Chimamanda Adichie. Oh, I don't think I went to the right slide. Where she talks about stereotypes, and she says the problem with stereotypes is not that they're untrue, it's that they are incomplete. They make one story become the only story. And so Shannon, you can grab the link in our document to the danger of a single story. If you haven't seen that video, it's 18 minutes, incredibly powerful. I encourage you to watch that. But stereotypes, like, they make a single story become told over and over and over again. And so in our brains, it begins to process this, and we'll talk how that works in bias. But again, these stereotypes, they are these ideological beliefs. And so prejudice, another key definition here to think about, is that we all have prejudice. I know that's an ugly word that we don't want to sort of have tied to our identity, but prejudice, it's a preconceived opinion that is not based on reason or actual experience. And so within the field of social psychology, prejudice, it refers more specifically to like attitudes and emotional responses towards a group and its members. And so again, all of us have a brain, and there are neural networks in our brain that hold stereotypes. There are neural networks in our brain that hold these prejudice networks. Let me show you a picture of that. So let me make you get seasick for a second. Hold on, let me click through. I think I got these out of order. 1 second, don't get seasick. Okay, so here we go. So there are neural networks in our brain that support the learning, experience, and expression of prejudice, and also the storage, activation, and behavioral expression of stereotypes. So again, if you have a brain, these things are part of our brain. We'll talk in the next section about how they manifest through biases and through the interpersonal interactions. But this is part of our brain, right? You can't necessarily wipe your brain clean and to remove these things. We'll talk about how you can reduce the way in which they show up and manifest through self-regulation. But again, all of this is deeply embedded in our brains. So even if you don't hold the stereotypes or prejudices to be true, they are in your brain. Your brain can access them. And so you already started this a little bit in the ideological column here of the Padlet, but I want to give you a chance to process this and think a little bit deeper. What are some examples of negative stereotypes about STEM careers? What are some of the examples of negative stereotypes about STEM careers? So you already suggested like that girls aren't as good at math as boys. What else? What are some more stereotypes? These ideologies that are deeply set in our culture, whether you believe them to be true or not. Yeah, so the sort of imagery of the nerd. And the jobs are nerdy, right? So both the characteristic and outcome, that you need to be good at math and science before going into STEM. Yes. But it's all men. It's for antisocial people, so not for people who want families or friends. It's only engineering or tech. Yeah. You have to be super smart. Yes. So we've got this sort of gatekeeper ideology related to it of like, you've got to be like a math and physics calculus superstar to be able to go into it. I can tell you that in my time as an engineer, only once did I do a calculus problem. And I only did it to say I did it because I had software that did all of that. But I was like, gosh darn it, I have studied calculus out the wazoo. I am going to do a calculus problem. And I did it. And then I was like, and we're going to use the software to check and validate that, right? So another stereotype is that some jobs are housed in dirty, uncomfortable environments. Yeah, so that can really kind of tie to like the manufacturing world of STEM. What did I miss? Anything else? Any other ideas? Oh, based on education, not an integrated STEM, critical thinking skills. Tell me more about what you mean about that. Unmute and share if you want.
There you go. I had to figure out how to unmute. I think that, you know, like there's a lot of even some of the like a lot of the skilled trades include a lot of that integrated STEM thinking, but we don't think of skilled trades as some of those, you know, like my husband's an electrician, well, he teaches electrical, the amount of science and math and even just, you know, engineering types of things that he needs to do all the time are incredible. But that doesn't get valued the same as someone who has a, you know, bachelor's, master's, or doctorate, you know, in a STEM field. And I think there's that disparity. It's sort of like a classism kind of thing.
Certainly is. It is a very classist viewpoint. And we're seeing this play out in the workforce. You know, I've been chatting with friends about student loans lately because, you know, it's been top of the news. And when I look, and because we've been talking about, I've been hearing people's numbers, right? And when I think about some of the numbers that they have compared to people who have skilled trades jobs, like it's real different. And then the earning potential in many cases for like electricians, right? Like electricians are some of the highest paid people, and it's deeply skilled. And so it is a cultural shift, and there's certainly a lot of work that's being done to change that ideology around, it's not just college, but it can be college and career pathways. But it's deeply seated. It's deeply seated belief that you need that 4-year degree. Other stereotypes is it's dry, it's not fun, or that you need to be perfect to be successful. Well, we know that isn't true, right? But that's certainly a belief. Excellent. Yeah, so these ideologies, they are, again, the sort of foundation of all of the barriers and the root causes that we're going to talk about. So when we come back after this break, we're going to dig into the interpersonal. So we're going to be talking about bias, we're going to be talking about role models and mentors, and feedback and support, and these three kinds of root causes that are connected to this interpersonal piece. And so again, looking at this model, ideological is the sort of foundation of this, but all of these pieces work together and they're all affecting the students who are at the center of this work that we're doing. So we'll do 10 minutes. I need to check my time zone. So it's 10 o'clock, so it's 11 o'clock. Okay, yeah, so we've got one more hour before lunch. So we'll come back in 10 minutes, try to do your best to stretch and refuel. And we're gonna dig into interpersonal when we come back. All right, see you in 10 minutes. All right, welcome back. Let's dive in. So now we're going to be talking about the second set of root causes that are connected to the interpersonal level or element of oppression. So interpersonal interactions. So these are how our ideas are then played out in our daily interactions, either intentionally or unintentionally. So they include implicit bias, micro messages, perpetuating or not interrupting stereotypes, not recognizing power and privilege, or claiming, I'm using big quotes here, reverse racism or oppression, because that's not a thing. So examples of this would be like getting catcalled in the street. So that's an interpersonal reaction. Not, as she said in the video, not making sure spaces for events are accessible. Laughing at jokes that are racist or xenophobic. And again, it's the way in which we are acting out these things at an interpersonal level. So again, some key terms here. So bias, an expression of prejudice and stereotypes is bias. And so bias, it's that prejudice that's in favor of a thing or a person or a group compared to another, usually in a way that's considered unfair. And so as a verb, bias causes one to feel or to show an inclination or prejudice for or against someone or something, usually in either an implicit or explicit kind of way. And so these implicit biases and prejudices, they are often unrecognized and may not align to one's declared beliefs or your values. If you haven't begun to sort of, the term being woke, right? Like that's the definition of this, is like when you're awake and you start to recognize and aware of these things, then you can begin to address them. But until you recognize them, you're generally unaware of them, right? And so that's where we have the labor that we need to do to learn and to increase our own awareness. But these prejudices, these stereotypes, and consequently the bias, they often operate in combination to influence our behavior. And so there are two kinds of bias, explicit and implicit. So explicit, that's what's happening in a conscious manner. Implicit, that's what's happening in an unconscious manner. For the most part, it is illegal to have explicit bias in education. Does it still happen? Yes, it does. But for the most part, it is illegal. And this implicit bias, this is what's such like an insidious sort of pervasive piece of our culture, is that we don't often see or recognize it because it's unconsciously happening. And so let's look at some examples of like an implicit bias that's connected to another interpersonal thing. So when I was working as an engineer for TI, we had like an annual take your kids to work day. And I don't have kids yet, but when I was in my mid-20s working at TI, we planned this really fun day. And we had this whole skit on like how the digital micro mirror device works. It was really fun. I didn't write the skit, but I was definitely the lead actor in it. Shannon, my actor friend, would be pleased, I'm sure. And so we go through this whole skit. It's really fun. We thought it was fun and entertaining. And then afterwards, this girl comes up to me, and her dad, who's one of my colleagues, is kind of like standing behind her talking to somebody else. And she looks at me and she's like so intent and curious. And she's like, I could see like her wheels spinning. And she's like, do you work in the cafeteria? And I was like, what? Like, no, I don't work in the cafeteria. I'm an engineer. I work with your dad. But what was happening in that moment is she couldn't place me, right? So in her sort of vision of what an engineer looked like, it did not look like me. So then I was trying to figure out, like, why on earth does she think I'm a cafeteria worker? And then I realized, like, we're in the cafeteria, right? So she's looking in her brain, and her brain is sorting through all of the stereotypes and messages that she's been given over life. And they fit this sort of kind of archetype image of what an engineer looks like. So we can see the sort of the character of Dilbert as it's manifested in like the uniform of the Best Buy character, the Best Buy employees, the Geek Squad, or we see it in the characters of the Big Bang Theory. She looks at her dad, she looks at her dad's friends, and none of them look like me. But when she thinks about cafeteria workers, her sort of schema, the single story of what she thought these people would be, looked more like me, right? And so these single stories, something that gets told over and over and over again, these messages that we're convinced to be true, they become these schemas in our brain. And a schema, it describes a pattern of thought or behavior that then organizes categories of information and the relationships among them. And so we all have schemas in our brain. These schemas are, again, a product of our lived experiences, the shows that we've seen, the messages that we've received in our life, the things that we read. All of these things create these schemas. Now raise your hand if you are ever tired, stressed, or in a hurry. Does this describe anyone? It's all of us, right? Like all of us at some point are tired, stressed, or in a hurry. So if this ever describes you, when you are tired, stressed, or in a hurry, your brain is more likely to draw on those schemas, even when you may know they may not be true. And so again, we have to be conscious and use our cognitive control to try to reduce the impact of all of these schemas that exist in our brain, all right? So when you all listed the ideologies, you didn't create new knowledge. You're literally like pulling stuff out of your brain, right? You're pulling out these facts or pulling out these ideologies, beliefs, so they are stored in your brain. And so this is what's happening. You've got rows and rows and rows of filing cabinets, in your brain. You've got lots of information, pictures, images, experiences. Sometimes they're not even experiences. They're just things that you heard of, right? And so your brain is processing all of this information. And so when we're using cognitive control, when we are aware of our brain's processing, we can be intentional about not choosing a stereotype, right? But when you're, again, tired, stressed, or in a hurry, that literally jams your mental bandwidth. And so that's why it's more likely to draw on those things. But there's something that we can do. But let's do a little bit of a statistics probability here. Don't worry, I'm not gonna make you do math. I'm gonna do the math for you. But think of your brain, because it's a probability problem, right? So if you think of your brain as like a deck of cards, right? So instead of a standard 52 card deck that's got, all the different cards, you've got a deck with 47 red sevens, and then like 5 other random cards. So we're in this example that red sevens represent like a single story. So if you've got 52 cards, 52 files of information in your brain, 47 of them sort of match that Dilbert character, for example, like nerdy, male, something like that. But you got 5 other, you've got, like Marie Curie and like a few other sort of gems that we often think about. Now, the probability that your brain accesses a red 7, so a stereotype, it's 47 out of 52. So 9 out of 10 times your brain's going to access that. But now if we begin to change the pieces of information, so we're going to change the probability. So now in a standard 52 card deck, you have 2 red 7s and 50 other cards where the 7s represent the stereotypes. So here, the probability that your brain accesses that red 7 stereotype is now 2 out of 52, or once out of 25 times. So how we begin to change the bits of information in our brain is 1, so we can begin to use some of this sort of cognitive control, but we also need to change the schemas. So this is why it's related to these role models and mentors. That's the second part of that we're going to talk about in a second, is that we have to change the schemas that students hold. if they don't see people who look like them in these pathways, they're going to have these stale, repetitive schemas of who gets to go into STEM. And so we can, as educators, we can use self-regulation to be really intentional about reducing the expression of those stereotypes. And we can start to sort of unravel the prejudice, stereotypes, and bias in our brain by expanding those schemas. So let's give it a little bit of a reflection here. If you're interested in learning more about the brain science and neural networks, I have a whole workshop on that. It's a asynchronous webinar that you can look up. So it's 7ab.co/4ACC. But let's reflect on this for a minute. So I want you to reflect on a time when you experienced bias. How did it make you feel? In what ways, if any, did it cause you to pause or potentially alter your behavior? So reflect on the time when you experienced bias. How did it make you feel? In what ways, if any, did it cause you pause or potentially alter your behavior? And so it's the same QR code. So if you've got it still on a browser, it'll just keep updating. So it makes you feel angry, offended, embarrassed. How else did it make you feel? How did it change your behavior potentially? You felt othered, excluded. It made you kind of dig in deeper. Yeah, felt ashamed, felt inferior, dismissed, made you less likely to share. Made you feel small and insignificant, insecure. Thank you for sharing these. What else? How else did it make you feel? And so somebody said it made you less likely to share. Yeah, change your routine to lessen the chance of it happening again. So in some ways that could be practicing good boundaries, but in some ways it could be limiting if you need that routine to get to where you're going. Made you feel alone and vulnerable, made you rethink your choices for the future, made you leave a job. We're seeing this happen right now, right? With this great resignation that's in the news every single day. People are like, why am I doing this job? Like, I'm not treated well, I'm not respected, like I'm out. People are really changing their attitudes about why they pursue and maintain torture sometimes. All right, anything else? Any other reflections on bias? What's coming up for you? If you haven't, so understanding bias, like this is very much for us as educators, as humans, it's an internal journey. You have to do the work and figure out, what are my biases and how do I begin to address them? How do I become conscious to challenge them? So there's a test for that, just like there's a test for everything. You can take an implicit association test if you haven't already. There implicit association tests for like all different kinds of dimensions. There are two that are specific to what we're talking about today: gender and science and gender and careers. And when you take these tests, first of all, I recommend this book, Blind Spot: The Hidden Biases of Good People by Dr. Banaji and Greenwald. And they are the creators of the implicit association test, but it's called Hidden Biases of Good People, the subtitle. And I think it's so important because we have to recognize that just because these things are in your brain doesn't mean you're a bad person, but we want to make the blind spots, we want to increase our visibility of those. So I recently retook the implicit association test that's related to gender and careers. Now I'm an entrepreneur. I have 4 businesses, all of different scales of effort, but like I have 4 businesses. It's what I've always wanted to do, is to work for myself, and I love it. Now I have, for the most part, dedicated my whole life to my work. If there's anything such as life balance, I don't have it because that's okay with me right now, right? But I recently retook the gender and careers test just out of curiosity. And it showed that I I still have a moderate association of women with family and men with careers. Does this make me like a bad feminist? Does it make me a bad woman, a bad person? No. It means that I grew up in a home where my mom stayed home with us for the most part. When I got to high school, she started working at the high school as our attendance clerk. So like my mom still works from home as, you know, she doesn't work outside of the home, not in like the work from home sense of what I do. So I grew up with a mom and I really value that. Like, I truly believe that the gift that she gave us as being a stay-at-home mom is what, you know, helped contribute to my future. And there are some deeply sort of gendered stereotypes in my family. Now, that's the sort of root of my bias, right? But I have to be really conscious of that bias and how I interact with others, even though it does not reflect my values, right? That women are less than, or that women are more associated with family. But it's creating awareness and that consciousness. And so you can start to learn about your biases. You can certainly take a test, but also surrounding yourself with people who challenge you and say, like, I think you might really reconsider that. Like, that might be a bias. And then dig in and learn more, right? So that's how we can really begin to understand those things. Any questions on bias before we move to the next interpersonal, which is role models?
I've dropped the links for blind spot and the implicit bias test in the chat.
Excellent, thank you. Let me get the chat so I can see it again. Perfect.
I just had a wondering around, like, so I think one of the things that's really hard to reconcile is like what you think would happen in a certain situation and how you actually act, and how your implicit bias impacts that. And I'm just curious if y'all have had a successful conversation with someone where like for conflict resolution of you having to be like, hey, the situation, how you acted in the situation was out of alignment with your values in a way that, like, you know, it's clearly impacted by your implicit bias. Like, has that ever gone well for y'all, or is that like always been like a tricky spot where it's like, maybe not so much, let's not engage in that spot?
So it could be hard or it could be easy. It depends on how open the person is. Let me give you another phrasing. So my favorite phrasing is, I'd like to invite you to consider what that might mean to so-and-so, right? Like, so instead of saying like, now you're like pointing at values and you're pointing at like implicit bias, you're just sort of giving an invitation to consider what that might mean. Of like, or you can say, I'd like to invite you to consider that, you know, that might be a stereotype, right? Like, that might be something that we can sort of unpack and begin to recognize. And so it's really the nature of like, how do we like call people in rather than calling them out? And now there are certainly some people that like, it's going to be real hard. It's how open they are to this. I firmly believe everyone is capable of change. I would not be in this business if I didn't think that. But I will also say that, how do I say this? My big brother, for example, I have resigned. I am not going to change his opinion because he is not going to listen to anything that I'm ever going to say, right? I'm not going to let really terrible things sit at the table, right? Like, I'm going to say like, I don't agree with that. I think that's inappropriate. But he isn't going to be open to my message, right? And so again, it's someone's readiness. But the way in which you invite someone to call them in and say, let's, you know, you don't want to do it in a big setting if you don't have to. But I also do feel a responsibility that one time years ago, I was at a conference and it was there was a panel of people talking about women in STEM, and interestingly enough, none of them were women in STEM. And they were like recruiters for a university and, you know, people like that. And this woman who I know, because I was on an advisory board with her, she was like saying some of the grossest stereotypes about women in STEM, about people in STEM. And this was a huge conference room of like hundreds of people. And I thought, I cannot let this go. And I like went to the mic in the middle aisle and I was like, I'd like to invite you to consider that there are other kinds of identities of people that go into STEM, and that we want to be really thoughtful to not perpetuate stereotypes because they can be limiting, right? So there are some times that if we don't speak up, we are then complicit with that. Because I felt as a practitioner in this space, as another speaker at the conference, not at that panel, but like, if I didn't say something, I thought, who's going to look at me and say like, you need to address this, right? So sometimes we have to build up that courage to say things. I do have some other tools, Rhea, that around how to move from sort of like debate to like a dialogue. So Shannon, if you'll make a note, I'll pull up that from my website later, but like, so do have some tools to help us sort of build that practice as well. But it's a great question. It's also a practice. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Wait, Shannon, you wanna speak more to what you added in the chat?
Yeah, I would just say, you know, a lot of times when you bring up something like that, there's that like that feeling of conflict and that feeling of unacceptance, that, you know, you're challenging their beliefs and who they are at their core is how it's received. And if, even though they may not can hear it and respond to it and be like, oh yeah, you're right, in the moment, it still sits back there and it still simmers and it still creates awareness. So next time they do it, they'll remember that you know, said something about it, and start that process of questioning that inner dialogue themselves. And then at that point, they are making choices. It's not implicit anymore. You know, then the change may be slow, I guess is what I'm saying. You're not probably in a single conversation going to completely change what they've done for 30 years.
Yeah. Yeah, there's also a tendency for people to want to deflect, right? And be like, but I'm a good person, or like my best friend's a Black person, or I know a gay person, like that kind of thing. And what's happening is, so we go back to the 4 I's, is, you know, we're trying to help people see a system and say, hey, we're all part of a system that we've been conditioned to sort of think in these kinds of ways. It's not necessarily about you, it's about all of our collective language and all of our sort of collective ideologies and how we sort of move through this. And that's the challenge of this work. Yeah. So let's talk next about role models. So this is the second of this set of the interpersonal. So the research is really clear when it comes to particularly women in STEM, is that girls and women need to see people who look like them, who go into these pathways that they can relate to. And so there are some specific characteristics of effective models. So that's either like a perceived similarity, credibility. They need to like be enthusiastic. I hosted a panel years ago and one of my friends from college was on it, and she was like having a bad day. And she was like real grumpy about her job. And I had to pull her aside and be like, Ebony, like, I'm gonna need you to like turn it up a little bit, because you can't be a good role model if you're unhappy with the gig, right? And so people have to be enthusiastic and excited about that. And they need to demonstrate competence through effort, right? We don't want to continue to perpetuate the, well, I was a math superstar. We want to talk about like, I worked really hard to be good at math because I knew it was going to be important for me to be successful in that. And so again, we want to model effort, not sort of like an inherent ingrained expertise. So tell me a little bit about the ways in which you currently use role models or mentors to encourage or motivate students to consider STEM. So what are y'all doing right now in your practices to bring in and engage role models in your work? You're welcome to open your mic and share too. It doesn't always have to be on Slido. Just trying to get people who want to communicate that way as well.
I've got a story that I think is too long for Slido, Shelly and I were at a employer event, and it's a skilled trades one, and they were talking about how worthless master's degrees were, how awful bachelor's degrees were. No one needed those. You can have a reasonable salary and career without any of that. And though all of that's true, how they approached it of just saying how useless bachelor's and master's degrees were, I'm just like, y'all, if I'm going to connect you with counselors to talk to kids, because that was their ask of us, y'all can't talk like this. And we were really just talking about like, here's a different approach. It's totally like, we understand what you're actually trying to say is that there are other options than just like the school to college pipeline. Let's reframe how you're thinking about this and actually show people the value of this particular skilled trade that you're trying to support. And that was a continued conversation. And also, I think, Shelly, correct me if I'm wrong, I do feel like we eventually got through to them on that.
I think we had some impact, but yeah, it's hard to tell. I will say too, I'm just going to jump in on the, when I'm helping schools plan activities or getting guest speakers, obviously availability is a huge issue when you're working with schedules. But I do try to get people that have different backgrounds. I mean, if I can get, females especially, I will say in Northwestern Michigan, getting any diversity or minorities in there is extremely difficult. But I do also try and get people at least with different backgrounds to get kind of a variety of that. I will admit that sometimes it is definitely hard to do, but that is something that I try to be conscious of doing. It's always something that, I can work more on, but it is something that I try to do because I want those kids to feel included.
Exactly. And it takes conscious, intentional effort. And it is also sometimes really, really hard and challenging. And we have to do it. So it is so worth it. I'm looking at my website. So I'm going to share this link with you because a lot of the things I'm sharing are here. So this is a page on my website on just sort of a lot of the books that I'm recommending, as well as a lot of the videos that I'm recommending and showing. But I did a video years ago, I think it's on here, how to be STEM, how to be a great STEM role model. And so there's the direct link to the YouTube there. And so it talks a lot about some of the things that we want people to say. And so I made that video years ago, like, I don't know, like 10 years ago, but it still holds good. And so we created it as a tool to show people like, hey, can you just watch this before you go and represent STEM? Because it says like what not to say, how we do want you to say the things that are going to be really encouraging. And so that could be a tool for you. Also, there are tons of great resources online now, especially in the age of like Zoom. You can have anybody in your classroom. So there are web pages like nepris.com. I think it's .com, Nepris, Nepris. If you Google that, they've got a whole speakers bureau, and they're just professionals who sign up and say, hey, I'm interested. And it's kind of like dating for, that sounds a little silly, but like for like a role model. So you can like skim through the profiles and be like, oh, I'd like them to come talk to my group. And then you can invite them. And that way, I don't know what the response rates are, but you can pick several people. And so check out Nepris and for a speakers bureau. Good. So you have a mentor program. That's great. And so they're meeting once a month. Fantastic. All right. So the next one is feedback and support. Now, feedback and support is also one of the sources of self-efficacy, which we're going to talk about later when we come back from lunch. But feedback is so important because it helps students to really build those sort of strong identities. And so when we're thinking about feedback and support, it's not just the words that we say, it's certainly the way in which we are engaging with students and encouraging them. And so we need support. We need support from our families. We need support from our communities, from our educators. We need the support from our friends, and all of these support networks They are these interpersonal relationships that affect our decisions, right? And they affect our belief of like, can I do this? Should I do this? Do I belong in that? And so we want to be able to provide lots of strong feedback for students so that they can see themselves in these kinds of careers. You know, we get feedback messages all the time. I have another workshop recording on feedback that I can share with you if you want to learn more about how to give effective feedback. But it's so important that we create useful strategies for helping to build our students up. So the next source, again, we're going to try to move through these. My goal is to get through culture and climate before lunch. We're moving pretty good clips, so we might be able to make a little further. So now we're looking at the institutional. Now, institutional are the ways in which the institutionalized oppression, like it creates this sort of system of invisible barriers that limit people based on their membership in certain groups. So the barriers, excuse me, the barriers are only invisible to those seemingly unaffected by it. I want to show you, I had a friend write to me the other day. He had watched my TED Talk, which we are going to watch today. He's a colleague of mine. Actually, he's a client of mine. I do their website, but just to be a helpful person. But he watched my TED Talk, and it's called How to Be an Inclusive Leader. And he said to me, he said, I worked in a male-dominated engineering industry, oil and gas. We had female engineers. All the way back to the 80s, we had female engineers. I never saw them treated differently, but I never thought about how they might feel in that environment. I never thought about how they might feel in that environment. And so in this particular post, and I'll put this link in a chat too, if you want to read more of my thoughts, like what hit me about his responses is that he never thought about it because he was unaffected by it. Like, it's like telling a fish that water is wet. They don't know it's wet because it's their lived experience, right? But until you have that awareness of like, oh, I wonder what it feels like to be the marginalized or minoritized person in this field. He just never thought about it. And so whether he meant to or not, and what's so great is like Tommy's like one of the nicest people I've ever met. He is so nice. He's so kind. He's so genuine and authentic. And even though he wouldn't have done it intentionally, he could have been complicit in a culture that continued to marginalize and exclude women, right? Just by not being aware of how they might feel. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about the sort of institutionalized things. And so if the oppressive sort of consequences accrue to laws, customs, or practices or norms in a space, then the institution is oppressive, whether or not the people maintaining those practices have oppressive intention. So examples of institutionalized are like education, laws, media, the public policies. As I said in the video, the gender pay gap is institutionalized sexism. The public school system maintains structural inequality through practices such as tracking students, standardized tests, and a teaching force that doesn't reflect the student body, right? So let's talk first about culture and climate. And, you know, when I mention these words, what is it? Just think about what is it that sort of comes to you when you think about culture and climate, and we'll give you the definitions here as well. Culture and climate, what does it sort of mean to you? How it feels. Thanks, Shelley. What it looks like, yeah. The experience you have in that space. What is okay within the office, and what are the patterns of behavior are prevalent? Thanks, Trey. Yeah, so culture, the word culture implies the sort of patterns of human behavior That includes our thoughts, our communications, our actions, customs, beliefs, values, and the institutions of social groups like race, ethnicity, religion. And culture, it shapes our beliefs and it informs our biases about people based on their age, their gender, their race, language, disability, or ability, their class, their income level, or other factors, often without our realization, right? So culture, the way in which we're sort of conditioned to learn, it literally is like mapping our brains and it shapes those beliefs. We can unwire those through really intentional effort and through lots of cognitive control and learning and learning and learning. But our culture shapes those beliefs. Now, climate is the way that people experience the work or the school or the learning environment. What's it like to work there? How do individuals feel when operating in that culture? How do the conditions, the decisions, the actions of the leadership or of the team, how does it affect the general mood of the space? And so when you consider the sort of collective experience of all the students, the talent or whomever, you're evaluating climate. So I'm going to show you the TED Talk that I did back in October in Chicago, because I talk about, it's about how to become an inclusive leader. And so that's also important, but that's not the point of our day today, although it is still really important for the sort of model of what we're trying to teach. But what I want you to listen to is the sort of conversation around belonging and authenticity, because that, and think in reflecting on, you'll hear my story about how I experienced engineering. And I want you to begin to think about in your own experience, how have you experienced belonging? How have you experienced instances where you felt inauthentic in an effort to belong? And then we'll have a conversation about this as it relates to our students and their STEM journeys. It's 11 minutes, so it's not a very long one, but buckle in and we'll be back. Come back. So I want to give us a few minutes to process this, but specifically, I want us to reflect on belonging and authenticity. And so what I want to do is I want to give you just a few minutes to just reflect. I want you to independently think about, what does it feel like to belong? What does it feel like to be authentic in a space? In what ways can you relate to trying to be that square peg in a round hole, that determined nature in which you lose part of yourself in that process? Just take a few minutes to reflect, and I'm going to push you into some breakout rooms to have some conversation on this. All right, so I just put in the chat a direct link to the discussion guide. Now, there are lots more questions on this guide than you could talk about in the few minutes for the group. But what I want you to do before I push you into the breakout rooms, on the first page, there are questions on questions about belonging. And then the second page are some questions about feeling valued and affirmed. And so what I want you to do before I push you into breakouts, I want you to pick one of these questions to be your question that you're going to have in the small groups. And I'm going to put you into pairs for this conversation. And so everybody pick a question that you want to talk about with your pair. Let's see. Looks like we might have a couple of groups with 3. 1, 2, 3. Let's see. No, it looks like we'll have all 2s. 2. Okay. So again, you're going to be in pairs. So it is a think, pair, share. Pick a question from page 1 or 2 of the file in the chat, and then discuss that with your partner. All right. I'm going to set a timer for 8 minutes, and then we'll come back and we'll tie it up right before lunch. Actually 7 minutes. Okay. All right, welcome back, everyone. So what I want to encourage you to do as you go to lunch break for the next hour is just to continue to sort of simmer on the idea of belonging and authenticity within STEM spaces for our students. When we come back this afternoon, we're going to continue to work through the model and learning more about the rest of the interpersonal, the institutional pieces. And then we'll begin to wrap up and then start doing some action planning and thinking about how can we begin to address this. But I've got a few more exercises between them. Sound good? All right. If you have any feedback to make your experience better for the afternoon, let me know now. I do have a feedback form officially for the afternoon, but if there's something I can do to make your experience better, let me know now so I can do a quick adaptation. All right. I'll see you back in an hour. I'm muted. You're not hearing me talk. Okay. So what did I say? Welcome back. I said that for sure. So we didn't have a chance to debrief before we went to break. And so I want to just give a chance for us to sort of open the floor. Were there any sort of questions or concerns around belonging, authenticity, culture, and climate that you wanted to bring before the group?
I'll just say that it's tricky because, like, as someone who really enjoys Broadway show tunes, that can be excluding when you're in a room full of people who do not enjoy that or have any context to that. And also on the flip side is that I'm not, I don't live and breathe hunting. And so, like, if that's the main, like, smoozing sweet talk conversation, I'm also not feeling very comfortable in that room either. And I know that, like, there are some people who enjoy both of those things, but they are also very rare souls. And so, like, that dichotomy can be a little hard. And like, there's and I think that there's a difference between a pattern of this always happening versus like, oh right, I just forgot that, like, we're not including you in on the conversation. Okay, like that's a very different thing rather than someone intentionally going after something that they just believe that you're not interested in. So
yeah, there's two parts to this. One is that we want to train our students and we want to be intentional about creating environments that are more inclusive. And we want to equip students to know what to do when they don't feel included, right? And so that means finding a group of people who you can relate to, recognizing that, you know what, those may not be your people. That's okay. It doesn't mean you don't like literally belong there, but you've got to find that connection, that value and affirmation. You might have to find that in another place. And so there's the two sides of it. Like, we want to change the systems, we want to change the environment, but we also want to realistically equip people to be ready for those environments when they can. Shannon asked me an interesting question in break around, we were talking about sort of women in engineering programs. And I revealed that in the 11 years I was in college, I never participated in like the Society for Women Engineer events. And I didn't because of stereotype, right? We're going to talk about later, but I thought, I'm a woman. I don't need to remind everyone, like, I don't need help. And like, I was so sort of defensive against those things, which is ironic given my career path at this point. But when I was in industry, I had a mentor, and she said, Meagan, you're going to go to the Women in Engineering event. And I was like, no, I'm good. I don't need help. Like, don't need to remind everyone I'm a woman. I said those same words. She's like, first of all, you don't say no to a senior vice president. And number two, you're going. And so I went and I sat around the table with all these women. It was a boardroom. And it was the first time that I realized that I was experiencing so much marginalization and exclusion, because they were talking about it and they were saying it was wrong. And I was like, I just thought that's how it was, right? And it wasn't until I had that community and that camaraderie that I could begin. I mean, that was the moment. Like, I remember it. Like, I viscerally remember it. Like when I had like rose-colored glasses just ripped off my face. And then I couldn't unsee all of these things that I had been experiencing for so long. And so we do want to equip students to figure out how do they find that community. Interestingly, the story that I told in my TED Talk about the Engineers Without Borders conference yesterday was Facebook reminded us that it was the 7-year anniversary of that event. And the woman that I was, went there with, she pointed me to it and reminded me of it. And it was just such a reminder of like how we have to connect and find that connection sometimes if it's not inherently happening. Again, students aren't broken. We don't need to fix them. We do want to change the system, but we also want to equip our students with what they need to be successful. All right, well, let's keep moving forward. So we're going to talk now about some policies and procedures, marketing, intersectionality, and student voice. Again, this is not a graduate level course. I'm just trying to give you a little bit of overview of these root causes, and then we're going to apply them to some learning. Now, policies and procedures, what this means and how they can be institutionalized. So many of the things that you shared earlier, you talked about transportation, the way that students have access to courses, how scheduling is set up. Like those are policies and procedures. It's sort of the way it's built into how we, coordinate students. It could be, how students have what additional services are provided to them. So we can unintentionally institutionalize bias into these things. And even like when we think about it's connected to the next one, which is marketing messages. I have a participant client that's working on right now is that she went through and she's going through and she's rewriting all of her career and technical education course, like introductions, because she took it to the kids and they're like, we don't know what any of this stuff is. And I challenged her to have the kids like write course descriptions and like TikToks and memes. And she's like, we're not quite there yet. But the kids wanted to, right? And so we have to figure out how do we communicate what this is in a way that they understand, that's attractive to them. But if our policies and procedures continue to say like, we can't do things like that, we have to do it the way it's always been done so that the adults are clear, who are we really serving, So talking about marketing messages. Now, I think when I did a training with you several months ago, we talked a lot about marketing messages. And so we're not going to go real deep into that. But marketing includes everything from like the messaging, the words that we're using, the strategies that we're using for how we're communicating, the imagery, like who's in the poster, who's on the website, who's in the brochures, to certainly the efforts that we do, like how are we pushing content out, who is it getting to, and those kinds of things. Now, we probably talked about a few months ago the changing the conversation messages. And so the link for that is, I think, somewhere in the chat. I thought I had this twice. Maybe I have this twice. Oh, here it is. Here's the link to that. And so this was a National Academy of Engineering report that said, hey, engineers don't know, people don't know what engineers do. And these are the 3 messages that distilled down. So if we're not using language that talks about how STEM professionals make a world of difference and shape the future, if we're not talking about how STEM careers are essential for our health, happiness, and safety, if we're not talking about how STEM professionals are creative and collaborative problem solvers, we're not using language that's going to truly reach the masses. And I wish I had a screenshot of this, and maybe I do back on some like old hard drive. But the College Board website years ago, it used to say, like you had all the different careers, and on the engineering page, this was the marketing pitch. Do you like really hard calculus problems? Do you like working late hours in the lab? Then engineering might be for you. Now, I am putting my own emphasis, but those are the words that it said, right? Like that's the worst sales pitch ever. Now, that might work for like a handful of people, but for the most part, like that's not appealing to everyone. Now, I think they've adopted some new language in marketing, but we have to think about what's the sales pitch, the marketing, the messaging of our program. We also want to think about work values. So often STEM is positioned as the extrinsic value that it offers. And it certainly does. My friends at TI, they've been rocking out 20% profit sharing for the last few years. So that means they're all driving Teslas come every February, right? Like they're all getting these huge bonuses. So like that's certainly a benefit. But we have to also talk about the value of STEM careers for other values. Like I want to do work that's interesting to me. I want to do work where I get to sort of own my own piece of the pie. I want to do work that makes a difference in the world. I want to do work where I get to work with other people, that I'm not like isolated in a cubicle. I want to do work that allows me to be respected and have earning potential and the ability to build a career. So we want to make sure that we're talking about STEM and all these messaging. So let's do a quick brainstorm here. I want you to think of examples of limiting STEM marketing messages that you've seen, of limiting STEM marketing messages. We've got screenshots. I want to see them. But if you just got examples, drop those in as well. Years ago, I was asked to advise on first robotics. They were creating their new, like the theme of the year. And the woman who I knew, she's like, I need your help because the direction they're going is like way bad. And I need language to help me address this, because they were doing like a whole Renaissance theme with castles and all that's fun. It reinforces some deeply rooted cultural stereotypes about power and class. And so, you know, she was seeing that the message that the whole annual theme was going to have was going to be really limiting that. And it also marginalized women, right? And so we did not change it, but we certainly tried for the year. So all white male engineering college recruiting folders, the G like math and science, starting with that, yeah. Again, all men in the field making money. Now, again, what's interesting about work values is that for many students, they're not in a place yet where they're seeing their other work values, that like the hierarchy of needs is like, okay, money first, right? And so it's okay to still talk about making money, but we need to also make sure that we're talking about these other kinds of things. To participate in First Robotics, you must woo a lady to join the team. Is that a real thing? Or are you just saying like the story that I just said?
No, that's a real thing. Someone who I worked with in the world of robotics, like their approach to including more girls in the robotics team was that every guy had to woo a lady onto the team. And he didn't really care how they did it.
Ooh.
And so, yeah, that was.
Wow. Yeah. So, I mean,
yeah,
a lot happens in that space. And First Robotics, I want to give them credit because I know some people that work there and they're working really diligently to make some change. But another conference I was at, one of the keynotes was, actually, it was the guy they made like a Disney movie about, like his robotics team, or I think. But in his speech, there were not any girls, there were no girls on the team that he had that like won all these awards. But he talked about like his reward for the team was to take them to Hooters. These are high school kids. And so I'm in the audience, like just tweet blasting, like, no wonder you don't have any girls on your team. And I caught him after the conference and like, he wouldn't engage with me. But I was like, come on, man, like you've got this platform, like if that's what you did, you can't change it, but like, let's not keep saying it, you know, because that's like making it okay. And so if this is the culture that we're creating of like, to be here, you've got to like have this kind of idea, like, again, the messaging is so powerful. And it connects with that culture and climate. So speaking of connection, I want us to talk next about intersectionality. Now, this word has been in the news for the last year, and it has been misunderstood and confused. And it is a real thing, and it really does matter. And so intersectionality, like it's the connected nature of all of these categorizations and how they create these overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination or advantage. So my experiences as a white woman are going to be different than the experiences of a Black woman. because as a white woman and within STEM in some parts of society, I have a marginalized identity. But a Black woman has both the gender and the race that overlap and affect their experiences. And so for us as educators, it is literally our job to understand the ways in which we serve students. So if we are not disaggregating data by at least gender and race and whatever other intersection of identity that we have around SES or something like that, then we aren't serving our students, right? Because until you disaggregate that data, you can't tell who's being served and who's not being served. And there are many intersections of identity. We're going to watch another cute little stop motion video here that I think really beautifully portrays what intersectionality is. Let me make sure the audio is shared.
Intersectionality. Have you heard this word before? Even if you have, you might not know what it means. Let's take a look at it. The first part's easy enough. Intersection, a place where things come together. Intersectionality refers to the reality that we all have multiple identities that intersect to make us who we are. It also gives us a way to talk about oppressions and privileges that overlap and reinforce each other. This term dates back to the 1980s and legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw. She noticed that we didn't have an effective way to talk about how the experiences of Black women are different from the experiences of Black men and of white women. How? Black women endure both gender discrimination and racial discrimination. Over the last 30 years, scholars, educators, and activists have expanded the use of the word intersectionality to talk about identities beyond race and gender. Let's look at a few examples. Jerry has a disability, and his family lives below the poverty line. He is the oldest of 10, which requires him to do a lot of caregiving and sometimes keeps him out of school. No one in the school counseling office has talked to Jerry or his parents about his plans for after graduation. He has applied for several jobs, but never gets called back. Fatima is Muslim and recently came to the United States from Somalia. She finds that many people at her school make assumptions about her values and abilities before they speak to her. Many of her classmates think she shouldn't be at their school at all. Greta comes from an affluent family. Both her parents and grandparents went to college, and her father owns a successful business. She doesn't think about her identity very often, but she does think of herself as someone who will go to college and get a good job once she graduates. Think about Greta's situation as opposed to Fatima's or Jerry's. Fatima and Jerry are members of marginalized groups. They don't get to choose whether or not to think about their identities. Greta, on the other hand, can ignore intersectionality if she wants to. Life isn't the same for everyone, even for people who share identity characteristics. By adopting an intersectional lens, we have a better opportunity to understand why and to change the institutions that help and harm us based on who we are. Want to learn more? Read our story, Teaching at the Intersections, in the summer 2016 issue of Teaching Tolerance magazine.
All right, so as you noticed in the video that there are lots of different intersections of identity and they overlap to influence our students' experiences and our own lived experiences, and that we can't separate them, right? You can't just become one thing because all of these things are overlapping. And so we want to make sure that we're always taking into consideration this. I'll give one example. So in the degree program that I was in, it was funded by Texas Instruments. So they took women who were majoring in computer science or math at Texas Women's University. They paid for our school. We had internships. And then we got a master's in electrical engineering at Texas Tech, which is in West Texas. And there were about a dozen of us in that program. And what is interesting, and someday I'm going to write about this, do a study on it, is that the 4 Black women did not graduate from the master's program. Now, they went on to get PhDs from somewhere else. They went on to have remarkable other careers, but they did not have what they needed to be successful at Texas Tech. And that's because of intersectionality. Texas Tech was really intentional about providing women what they thought that women needed to be successful because they were leveling us. So like A master's usually assumes that you have a whole bachelor's level of knowledge of that. So they provided tutoring, they provided, whatever we needed, but yet those Black women, they needed something different, right? And a West Texas community, which is not very diverse, right? And so that's why we have to look at intersectionality. Because if they just looked at it overall, they'd say, yeah, well, the program's working pretty well. But when they disaggregate by race, they can see, well, we are not serving Black women. So we have to do something different. And so that's why an example of why we need to disaggregate data and look really intentionally at that. So the next key root cause here is student voice. How are our students, how are they contributing to the work that we're doing? As an engineer, we think a lot about, user-centered design. How are we asking the user what they need? How are we exploring the way in which a user uses a product? Same thing with education, right? Are we making all of these decisions about STEM programs without students in the room, without having their voice and their input and their ideas? So I want you to think for a second, in what ways might students' voices positively influence STEM programs and pathways? In what ways might STEM students' voices positively influence STEM programs and pathways? That's right, they know what appeals to them. They might identify how they see themselves in the program and what supports they need. Yeah, exactly. We ask them, what do they need? How do we help you? What are the supports that we can provide? They absolutely have greater insight into what they need to be successful, and circumstance and generation gap empowers them. What else? Buy-in, for sure. Listen, it takes some of the pressure off of us to read their minds when we ask them what they think. It increases participation, engages them in the problem solving. It teaches them certainly to be advocates for their own education. So there's a value on that end as well. Positive experiences, yeah. So a big part of understanding root causes is, so we could sit here and, speculate all day what it might be, but typically when I work with clients over a longer period of time, we scaffold an exercise where we do this whole root cause analysis, and then you go test a hypothesis and say, okay, well, we think this is it, but let's do some surveys, let's do some focus groups and interviews to determine what's actually happening. And then how do we design a strategic intervention that's going to address that need? All right, well done. So we're going to go into the last section of the 4 I's and talk about self-determination now. And so again, this is how all of these external things are influencing students. And so as the video earlier said, oppression, it always begins from the outside of the oppressed group. But by the time it's internalized, the external group the external oppression doesn't hardly need to be felt because the damage is already done. And so it's sort of like it keeps oppressing us from within, right? And so examples of this can be like self-hate, believing negative messaging, powerlessness, or despair. Now, the key root cause that I'm spiking out here is what I'm calling self-determination. So this self-determination is each person's ability to make choices to manage their own life. But I'm including within this 3 different things: self-efficacy, mindset, and stereotype threat. Now, mindset and stereotype threat actually feed into and fuel self-efficacy. Now, self-efficacy is the belief in yourself that you can accomplish a task. And it always answers a question, can I do this? It could be a big task, a small task, complex task, or a simple task, but it's always task-based. And self-efficacy is different than self-esteem. High self-efficacy predicts academic achievement, while high self-esteem does not. So I could have a really low self-esteem. Self-esteem is like, how do I feel about myself? But I could have a high self-efficacy, and that predicts my achievement rather than how I feel about myself, okay? So those are two totally different constructs, and self-efficacy is a predictor where your self-esteem is not. And self-efficacy is important because a person who has a high self-efficacy, the greater interest, achievement, motivation, performance, persistence, endurance, all of the things that we want from our students, right? Like we want them to have all of these things that drive them forward. Whereas a person with a low self-efficacy, they're more likely to doubt, fear, and avoid tasks or avoid STEM as well, right? So we want students to have a high self-efficacy. And some studies indicate that self-efficacy is one of the greatest reasons for women's participation. But remember, it's a result of all of those other external things. So we can do work to help build self-efficacy, but we got to change the system too. We got to address all of those other things. And when we go to the application here in a bit, I've got some other resources on each of these things. So if you want to learn more, you can do that. So mindset is Carol Dweck's work out of Stanford. And her work says, mindset is the perception that someone holds about their, perception that people hold about themselves, which affects how they approach tasks. And it answers that question, can I improve with effort? And her work indicates that there are two different kinds of mindset. So a fixed mindset is the belief that your intelligence, ability, and personality, they're static. Nothing can be done to change it. Whereas growth mindset says that your intelligence, your ability, your personality can be developed and changed and improved with effort. So we want to build strong mindsets in our students. Now, the last one is stereotype threat. And so I've been sort of teasing on this one for a while. And so stereotype threat is a risk of confirming a stereotype about your identity in a space. So I love this comic strip here. It has on the first box, it's got a young woman sitting in between two guys in a classroom, and a little thought bubble says, wait a minute, I'm the only female in this class. The next box says, it's okay, no pressure, just be yourself, no pressure at all, just. And then the third box says, I'm only representing all of womankind. And then she and then her head goes down on her desk. And she says, engineering 1, womankind 0. And then the guys next to her are like, ditz, psycho, right? Now, this looks silly, but I know exactly what this feels like. I was the only female in a class full of 70 in my circuits class. And I was in a program called Women in Engineering. So I'm like, if I fail, somehow I'm going to validate that women can't be engineers. And why this is important is because it reduces my cognitive capacity to be engaged, because my brain unconsciously is like tied up with cannot fail, cannot fail, cannot fail, because if I fail, I'm going to validate the stereotype. And so again, that question that's happening in our head says, I can't mess up or fail because I might validate the stereotype that ... Okay, one more. I feel like I'm a little heavy on videos today, but hopefully they're helpful. I've got another little video here that again connects this with math and STEM, and then that's going to wrap up the section, and then we're going to do an exercise. Okay, so learn a little bit about stereotype threat in math and STEM. This is actually around computer science, and then we'll do an exercise.
I bet you can think of a time when you felt like you didn't belong. Maybe in high school you secretly thought you might have fun acting in a play, but never auditioned because you didn't think you would fit in with the drama kids. Stereotypes deeply impact people's stories and ideas about who belongs, and this can end up influencing our choices of what activities or even careers we pursue. Stereotypes like girls don't like math are everywhere, and these stereotypes are powerful. By the first grade, many children agree girls don't like math. Fast forward to their college years, and we see dramatic gender differences in who signs up for STEM classes like computer science or engineering. And women, especially Black, Latina, and Indigenous women, are vastly underrepresented in these STEM career fields. So, what might be contributing to these large gaps? Researchers at the University of Washington and the University of Houston find that stereotypes might be a key driver. In one study, 8 and 9-year-olds were invited to do some computer science activities. The kids got to choose between two different ones, but here's the crucial difference. One activity was introduced as something that girls are less interested in than boys. And sure enough, the girls in the study thought that they wouldn't like it either and didn't want to do that activity. The researchers even told the kids that boys and girls are equally good at the activity, it's just that boys were more interested in it. Even when girls weren't worried about how good they would be, the stereotype still caused a gender disparity. But the other activity, the one with no stereotype attached to it, the girls wanted to try it just as much as the boys did. Whether we believe them or not, societal messages about stereotypes are powerful in shaping our sense of belonging. Girls may pick up on cues that they shouldn't be as interested as boys are in STEM from peers, parents, or teachers, even if those adults don't mean to send these signals. These messages are so prevalent in society and culture that we don't always notice them, but they still really matter and have impact. That's why it's important that we all work to counter the stereotypes that are often embedded in the messages kids receive and address them in our homes, schools, and communities. Rather than urging girls to simply fit in with the fields of engineering and computer science as they're currently portrayed, we have to expand and diversify our societal narratives of who belongs in these fields. And this is something that we'll all benefit from. Anyone can do computer science. Yep, even you.
All right. Now we're going to move forward to apply some of this learning in a little case study exercise. So I put the instructions in the chat. So you're going to open two things. You're going to open up the case study Padlet, and you're going to open up the case studies in your handout. And so again, we're going to sort of see how each of these is applied and showing up in the example of the case study. Let me find my slides here. Nope, that's not it. That's not it. Too many slides. Okay, here's Emma's journey here. And so the questions I want you to think about is, so what root causes are you seeing here? And what ways are they overlapping? And then how do the root causes affect participation and completion? And then I want you to think about Emma's STEM career journey map. What are the stages of her journey? What are the influencing elements and the opportunities for intervention? All right, let me shuffle up the breakup rooms. While I'm doing that, you can start reading the case study. I'm going to give you 13 minutes. Okay.
been different if Emma had just had like one buddy or one like supportive family member or an auntie or something like that. If she would have been able to stick it out with just having like one person who like is still a part of her everyday life.
Yeah. Yeah. The power of one. It can take just one.
I think I had, when I was looking at it too, is like, there are so many different factors that it can take one thing to turn the tide, but she did have some positive engagement for classes when she was younger, but there wasn't that connection to what's next. So yeah, I mean, there are multiple things, and sometimes you can't identify one wrong thing because there is so much overlap. But I do think that, you know, one person or one thing sometimes can make the difference. So it's frustrating yet hopeful.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Shelley. What else? So I see that you identified some of the root causes, and you connected ways that they overlapped and how it affected her, certainly feeling disconnection, and then, you know, noticing too, like there were some positive things and there were other kinds of ways that interventions could have been made. So certainly role models, perhaps an advisor that had been trained in ways to better prepare her. So rather than going to like a general studies, how can we help her get what she needs to be successful in that STEM pathway? You know, helping the teacher to have some training to address the curriculum is a strategy in there as well. You know, doing some intentional training for students so that they are learning to create inclusive environments for their classmates. And so this could be also a function of like, how is the teacher grading? If the teacher is encouraging them to, you know, be accountable and responsible to being, you know, an inclusive collaborator, then that should be part of the grading system. Anything else? Any other things that you noted? By the way, this statement here, those are men's jobs. Can you pick something more feminine? True story. My grandma said that to me. True story. Clearly, I listened to her. Okay. So what we're going to do now is we're going to move forward and we're going to try to put you back the best that we can in the original groups that you were working with. Some people have left, so we're going to piecemeal you a little bit together. So what we're going to do now is we're going to find the root causes that are connected to the journey maps. So your goal is to find connections and explanation for the elements of the map that you created. So at this point, we're going to open back up the, I think I'm pasting this here. Whoops. Dropping instructions here. So you're going to open the digital chart paper, and the digital chart paper has a second set of slides here. And so you'll see this slide here has all of the things listed that we've gone over. You're going to find your group slide here, and the instructions as before are in the notes here. So the way this is set up, it's really just, there are some tools for you to use and how you're going to move forward. But you can use the boxes provided. So you can say that you want to move them around to sort of reorder them. You can do that. I created the little diamonds here so that if you wanted to, let me do it on one that's not going to be used. So say that you wanted to Control X, and then you're going to come back up to your slide here, and then you're going to drag it to wherever you think that that one's at play. So you can sort of pin them on your map. The goal is to see, and so you might have one at all of them, right? But the goal is to, so if we were in person, we would have had Post-it notes and like little stickers and chart paper and colored markers, but here we are, right? So, so that's my little version of a sticker that you can kind of drag around. And again, the objective of this time for you is to see all of the ways as a student's going through this career journey that these root causes are connecting. Then we're going to come back and then we're going to do some brainstorming around strategies and then action planning. All right. So Shannon's got a room set up. Your instructions are in the chat and in the digital chart paper.
Megan, can I move the our other slide down so it's right next to this one?
Absolutely. It's
Thank
your
you.
sandbox. Let's see, where was Lauren? So we got Lauren and Britt.
I'm not sure if Britt jumped off. She said she had to go at 2.
I guess, yeah, she hasn't joined it, so. Well, let's just drag her into another room in case she pops in and we don't see it.
She's assigned to a room.
But she's by herself though, isn't she?
Oh, yeah.
Cool. Good, good, good.
If you look back to slide 9, like, I mean, awareness, I mean, everything seems to impact like how much awareness or how much you know about a career, you know, who you live with, what their stereotypes are, who you're surrounded by, what the biases are, whether or not you have any role models or mentors in your life. It just seems like if you look at each stage of the journey, like everything seems to kind of play a part in that, or it could impact it at any point in time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, thanks. Anything else from the rest of the group you want to add? Okay. All right, let's go take it. Say it again.
That I speak for all.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you. How about Jennifer, Ashley, and Dre?
We're playing the waiting game. Okay.
Yeah, no, it's fine.
Oh, it's all good. Go.
Okay. So, we voice, we obviously have all for a few of those as well. And we realize how it does relate, in other areas. But we really, tried to, pick others as well, where, maybe emphasized more. I think we had a lot of good discussion about, how each of these things could have helped her along or hindered her progress. But, and we did come back to, boy, especially in the role models and mentors, one where, boy, if she could have had one cheerleader, it could have made all the difference in that awareness and selection and experience piece. But yeah, Drea, anything else there you'd like to add?
Ashley, you did a marvelous job.
Oh.
And I appreciate it. I couldn't see our what we wrote. I just found it.
Oh, good.
Thank you.
Good. All right. Thanks, group number 2. How about group number 1?
We concur with Blaze that everything seems to affect everything. A lot of times we wanted to write, can we just write number 1 through 10? But so we did that on a lot of the steps or stages, but we then highlighted, we felt like there were some dominant ones in each category. So we tried to just kind of dominate which ones, like for example, in the completion stage, we said that, what was number 6?
Policies and procedures.
Okay, policies and procedures, as well as 10, self-determination. would really be maybe more important because for one, the policies, procedures, a lot of times with different careers, you have to maybe move on with your education. Like the policy is like, you have to have X degree to move forward. But then also it's your determination at that point to figure out, are you wanting to complete this program? So, but yeah, overall, it seems like almost every single stage was affected by each one.
All right.
We also frequently came back to a lot of the feedback and support and role model thing too, like kind of like Ashley mentioned to you, is like that role. Sometimes that one role model or support can make a big difference too.
Indeed. All right, so we're going to continue sort of moving forward on this. Again, the intention of this exercise is to help us see that there are lots of influences at every turn. And so what we want to begin to think about is, I want to show you a way to begin to think about how this could be happening, what could specifically be happening for your population. And then we're going to spend some time brainstorming strategies and then thinking about, well, what is it that I can do? Like what is it that we can put into motion here? So as the earlier video that we watched talked about a root cause analysis. So a root cause analysis is a structured process that helps you identify those underlying factors or causes. And why it's so important is that when we understand those factors or causes, then we can develop actions that sustain the correction. The example I often use is, when people are like, well, we think it's role models and mentors. So the solution is we're going to make a mentoring program. And mentoring programs can be awesome. And they can also be a lot of work with not a lot of impact, right? And so we want to make sure that we're creating and investing our time, our money, our resources into something that's going to best direct that root cause that's happening for our population. And so one way to do that is to thoughtfully create a hypothesis. And so the formula that I like to use around this work is a sort of population, focus, program, and then a root cause hypothesis. So an example would be Hispanic women don't participate in engineering because of class climate. That's a hypothesis that you would have come to based on through doing like a 5 why analysis. And then you go test that. So you either do surveys, you do focus groups, you do interviews, you could do an environmental scan on your own to kind of see what's happening, but you're doing a sort of grounded action approach where you're engaging students to ask them what's happening. With one of my partners, collaborators, one of the case studies that we often tout in that work is that there was a group in Oregon and they realized that, they went through a process like this and they said, we think it's role models and mentors. But then they went and asked the students, it was around a welding program. And so they went and asked the students and the girls were like, no, we're not welding because the uniforms are too big and my friend got burnt one time. And they're like, what? So they went and looked at all the uniforms and all they had were like large and extra large. So they had these V-necks and when you're welding, it burns. It can burn you. Like that's why you wear these jumpers. So they spent $350 and bought smaller jumpers. And then they did some other marketing to get girls and they went from like 2 to 26. Now that's really remarkable. But the point is they would have never known to go look at the sizes of the uniforms had they not asked, right? So sometimes we just got to ask what's going on, because what they found is they did not validate that they needed more role models and mentors, because otherwise they could have created this beautiful program that didn't serve the issue. That's why we got to ask the questions and we got to take some time to test our hypotheses and do an analysis. So another way to look at it is that you identify some root causes. And so you begin to do a kind of analysis where you're mapping through what is it that you think's happening. And then you got to prioritize them, right? Because what we just saw is it's like all the things, right? But we can't always address all of the things. And so you have the ability to recognize, well, what is it that I'm going to have the ability to measure and the ability to eventually do some kind of intervention. And then we recommend going and testing that. like I said, you're doing some kind of analysis where you're going to figure out what's happening. So what we're going to do next is we are going to, that's not it. I need to refresh that. I lost my slide. So what we're going to do now is we're going to brainstorm some specific strategies. So you all are experts in your field and your work, and you already know some of the things that you have available and the things that you can do. And so I've started adding a few resources to each column here. So there are the 10 columns, one for each of the root cause areas. And so we're going to do a brainstorm first, and then we're going to do a planning activity where you can kind of start to prioritize those. It'll also help me see where there's some gaps, and then I can start to fill those in a little bit deeper for you. So let's do, I'm going to move, let's see, to 2. Let me get my instructions for you. I may not have made instructions for this one.
I don't see them.
Okay. I forgot to write my tidy instructions for you. So you're going to open up this Padlet. And then follow the instructions there. So you're going to add strategies that can address each root cause, include links and resources if you've got them. Okay. So for this exercise, I'm going to set us up for 15 minutes, and I'm going to be watching what you're doing, and I'm going to continue to add more things in. I just didn't want to flood it initially. And let's see, I've got the room set up. Let's do 15. Okay. And if you need to move rooms, you can. You have that privilege. All right, we'll see you back in a bit. Let me know. Don't just like sit in your room if you're not understanding my silly instructions. Pop back out and say like, Megan, we need your help. So ask for clarification if you need it. Okay, so let's begin our sort of wind down for the afternoon. I do see many of you are having to jet out. So I want to make sure that I share with you the evaluation link. So I'm going to drop that here in the chat. Please take time to evaluate the session. I sincerely, and I truly mean that, value your feedback. It helps me to improve my services for future participants. I also am going to give that feedback right back to Shelly and Drea. So, so please complete that evaluation for us. If you value certificates, fill that out. I do those every few months, and so you'll have that. And it's also something that you can share on your LinkedIn profile if that is also a tool that you use socially and professionally. So, you know, take a minute to do that. Also invite you to join my mailing list. I send something out. My goals every week, but really it's like once every 2 or 3, 4 weeks. But I 100% promise that every time I send something out, there is a value add. It's something useful. It's a tool that that helps to advance, you know, diversity, equity, and inclusion with education in the workforce. So if you're interested in joining that, I encourage you to do so. So I just want to drop that in before people begin to fall out. So what we're going to do now is we're going to wrap up. You can open up your packet and turn to page 17. There's an awareness to action worksheet that's going to guide us through our reflections. And so what I want you to do is to spend a few minutes thinking about some of the things that you've learned today, how your awareness has increased. I want you to think next about what are some of the actions that you want to take. This question here on the right in orange is not on that handout, but I want you to think about it. So specifically, which barriers would you like to address differently than you had before? And then how might you begin to do that? And so reflection is a really critical piece of learning. So I'm going to set a timer and let you kind of pace yourself as you move through this reflection. And then we're going to come back together. We're going to stay in this group, and then we'll have everybody report out one of their action items. All right. I'm going to give everyone a chance to kind of talk through some of the things, key things that you've learned. I specifically want to make sure that we're going to share key action item. But let's start with this first prompt here on the screen. Which barrier would you like to address differently than you had before? And if it's okay, I want to just sort of work down the list. So I'm going to just go in order as I see them. Ashley, Troy, do you want to go first?
Sure. Is there anything specific you want me to talk about?
Yeah, so I got the, let's start with this first prompt here. Which barriers would you like to address differently than you had before? And how might you be interested in doing that?
Well, I thought the part around belonging and authenticity to be really intriguing and something I would want to really dive into deeper, because I was kind of thinking, like, does one need a sense of belonging in order to be authentic, or do you need to be authentic to create and feel belonging so that people really can understand and get to know one better? So I feel like there's like some reciprocity within that relationship. And so I don't know, I think I would like to explore that further. So I really appreciated the resource on how to become an inclusive leader. I think there are some really good question stems in there. So I think that's kind of my next action step, is I would really like to take a deeper look at that and some of the additional resources in there, and just be really thoughtful and reflective for my own practice and ways that I am just creating space for people to be authentic and have a sense of belonging.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you. I'd love your feedback too on like how you use it and how it works for you. And I think the question you ask is really great. And I think it's a challenge that we have to students, right? Of like, how do we teach them to be authentic such that we don't become less to fit into these places? And so there's so much of it's where we learn to sort of play a game to survive, but there's an expense to that. And so how is learning to move through life in an authentic way? How does it serve us better? For sure. I like that. Great question. How about Ashley Van Landshoot? Tell me if I said that correctly. Van Landshoot.
Yeah, it's just how it looks. Van Landshoot.
Got it.
Yeah, that's fine. So, I think as far as one thing that I need to keep in mind in my role as a counselor is just, it's amazing to me, I guess, how many deterrents there are out there that some people experience and those kinds of things, and just to continue to be a positive force and one that allows access, to every student that I can to what their particular interests and things like that are, and not to just be aware of, just some of those challenges or barriers that may have been there in the, past for them and also in the future for them, and just really allow them that access.
Great, thank you. How about Britt?
I guess I was thinking about more the conversations I'm going to have and how I approach kids about STEM related careers, and when I notice things about them, like, because I look at academic stuff and I'm like, ooh, you should think about this. And so it just helps me, how do I approach kids maybe a different way, more of a soft way.
All right, thanks. Drea.
Oh, how I want to just get rid of all the barriers.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, like, there's a lot of learning that still has to be done in order to, as a group, identify what, like, to build that shared knowledge over what the barriers are. So one of the things I've been able to identify of our STEM programs, and this isn't, I think this is quite common, and it's not meant to be an overly critical. It's just like, you got to know what's there. You got to you have to be able to have the scores to get in. And sometimes you have to have the ability to have a car to get to certain programs. And so to be able to have that shared knowledge so that we can actually have that next conversation over how are we making sure that these programs are truly getting to every student who would like to participate, for me is a long game goal. And also I think it'll be helpful in the grand scheme of things of just having these conversations.
Great, thank you. Jennifer.
So I'm also a high school counselor, and similar to Ashley's description, one thing when I work with students, sometimes I try to listen to them, but I need to do a better job of realizing what some of the barriers might be, but also asking the student to share their obstacles and why they might not be doing something, because like the whole thing with the welding and the uniform not fitting, okay, let's just get a new uniform, let's not do a whole other mentor program or something like that. So really listening to the students, understanding the barriers, but then let's say I have a student go and take an engineering technology class. So I put them in the class, whatever, next semester they're not doing it. Well, maybe I should be having a conversation. Well, what about that class made you decide maybe not to continue? And it could be simply, that's not the way I want to go. I explored this career and I want to check out something else. Or it could be, I was in this class, I was like, there were 2 females in here, I just didn't feel like I fit in. And if that's the case, then I need to then help them look at another, maybe a career internship or something else to support them and be their cheerleader.
Yeah, absolutely. Like if you take anything away from this, I want you to know, like, interest is not a root cause. Like when we say we're not interested, I mean, if you heard me tell my story when we met months ago, like when I was a graduating senior, despite the fact that I was president of like the robotics club and second in my class and like had taken every AP math and science class and had been programming since 8th grade, I had chosen interior design as my major. I didn't really want that, but I thought that that's what like I was supposed to do. That's what girls do. I really kind of wanted to be an architect, but I definitely didn't know any architects. And when we talk about the power of one person, it was Ms. Estes, Shannon, who was like, Meagan, you should do this. Like, you're good at math and science. You like math and science. And oh, by the way, go to Texas Women's University where my cousin's a professor and you get a full scholarship. And that changed my life trajectory. All I needed was her to say, this is for you. And when she's heard me tell my story as an adult teaching this work, and she cries every time, and she's like, we just thought you weren't interested. And I'm like, no, it wasn't interest. Like, I just needed one more person to tell me, like, you belong here, you fit here. And then fortunately, I had enough people who kept me in that path along the way. And so we just want to remember that just because they walk away doesn't mean it's not for them. It just means that there's enough barriers. So yeah, thanks, Jennifer. And Shelley, what about you?
Well, there's a lot of them, but I think the one I kind of came back to a lot is student voice. I've relied on those who know me know that my children are a huge part of my life. Well, they're not children anymore. They're 20 and 24, but I've relied on them and honestly, they're friends, which actually is an interesting collection of people, to kind of be part of that student voice when I've been working on stuff. And I need to consciously like reach out to younger and more to get more of that student voice and more of a variety. So yeah, I'm rethinking how I can build that up a lot more.
I love it. That's great. I think we got everyone, right? I think so. All right. Now, sort of wrapping up the day, the Non-Traditional Career's website, which I also put on the Padlet. This is just a sort of curation of all the kinds of things that I either create or find that I gather there. So you're welcome to bookmark it. And again, when I create new stuff, if you're on my email list, then you'll know that I create new stuff. And so I'm trying to, again, just create as many resources as possible around this area there. Now, so we've already done these reflections. You've talked about things that you've learned and that you'll do differently, but I do want to leave with the one really succinct action item. And so maybe what you already reported out was that thing. So whether it's one thing that you're going to go do, one thing that you're going to go read or learn, or one student that you're going to go talk to, that's what I want us to sort of do. One quick round robin, and then we will do an evaluation and then wrap up for the day. So I'm going to give you one more second to think of your one like quick action item. Who's the student, the thing, the person, something that you're going to read or do immediately. Maybe after a nap or a cocktail, whatever. but immediately enough. All right, let's go the other way this time. So Shelly, you go first.
I have a couple of students in mind that I'm going to target, and I'm going to read that under the student voice, that article that you have in there too. So.
Okay, awesome. Jennifer.
So kind of what I said before, I actually have a student in mind who is not continuing with the class, just sent me an email while we're doing this saying that they wanted to drop the course, the second part of a class, and do something different. And so I'm not just going to change it. I'm going to have a conversation with that student first.
Awesome. I dig it. My order may be messed up, but we'll see. Drea.
Yeah, so I am going to create a little cheat sheet of sentence starter stems to start incorporating into conversations, because like in context here, I'm like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. In the heat of the moment where I can tell that like there's a clear miscommunication and we need to talk about that, I lose it. So for me, like, I'm going to create that cheat sheet and make sure that it is available for me in every possible spot. So.
I'd love to see it when you complete it.
Oh, yeah.
Actually, what the question you asked earlier, and I was thinking over lunch, I was like, I should make a cheat sheet for this, of like how to have these tough conversations. And there's probably something out there, but I always like to make my own things. But because I do think that there are some sentence stems that we could use for like how to have those conversations, and even pivot points of like, if it goes this way, like here's how to kind of respond. So yeah, so you inspired me to create some sentence stems for that too.
Awesome. Okay. I'll share what I come up with too.
Love it. I can't wait to see it. Britt.
Yeah. So Shelly and maybe Drea too made these career cards, or like career profile cards. And I always say I want to print them off and like display them somewhere. And I think that's what I need to do, because I think it shows faces of people in all areas. And I think it's easy for kids to pick up and browse as they like walk by. And I'm like, oh, I have nowhere to put them, but I think I just need to print them and then I will find somewhere, right, and lay them everywhere. But I think getting them in the hands of kids so that they can see men and women in STEM areas, I think would be something super easy. So
yeah.
Printing them.
And another idea, I'm assuming they're sort of postcard style, like send them as postcards and say, dear student, you're in this class and I think that this is an interesting career for you. So like making them really personal, and then everybody loves mail. So
oh, that would be so cool. Shelly, let's make them into postcards. I love postcards. I have them like, I'm seeing these ones all the time. Like that's awesome. Great. Okay.
One of my businesses is focused on postcards. It's just not off the ground yet. I do have the product design. I also love postcards. Okay, so Britt now. Ashley V. Land shoot.
I think not everybody in my team was able to attend today. So I think just kind of in our next meeting, having those conversations with the others, and also including our STEM teacher on some of these conversations as well, that in things that were brought up today. I think just awareness within our group will be number one.
Awesome. And Ashley Troy.
I would just like to dive a little bit deeper into some of the resources that were linked today, like the moving from debate to dialogue handout, and also the how to become an inclusive leader.
Got it. I love it. Okay, so as you've noticed, I recorded today. So my goal is to condense it all, erase all the blank things. So if you had colleagues that missed it, who actually like to listen to recorded workshops, I don't know who does, but if they do, I am going to make that available to you and I'll post it online, but I'll let you know when that's done. Given it's all day, it'll probably take me a few days to get that done for you. But as we shared in the chat, take a minute before you completely shift gears to evaluate the session. And that's not the right link. Copy. There we go. And I do want to just end on the note of the power of one, it sort of came up at the end of the day. And so certainly while our goal is to address systems and to change systems, when we talk about creating meaningful change, sometimes we have to focus on one, right? Because that helps us humanize the efforts. It helps us really focus on how is it that we can begin to implement and practice some of the things that we're learning. And so when we start with one and we keep adding on those, but we also want to see what opportunities that we have to extend our influence and control over the systems in which we are participating, right? So as Drea talked about, like, how do we help people move past these conversations of like, yeah, you just need a car, you just need these things, like, but do you really? Just because you've always needed these things, how do we begin to change the conversation and change the expectations of what the status quo has to be? And so may you be the Ms. Estes for someone, the one teacher that changes a life trajectory and a conversation that she doesn't even remember, right? And so may you be the person that inspires every kind of student who doesn't see themselves in a field or that they don't feel like they belong in that space. You can be the one that encourages them. I am so, so grateful that you've chosen to hang out with me for a day. You have been a phenomenal group. Sometimes people like don't talk and that makes it real hard, but you've been really engaging and you've made this fun. And I hope that it's been a great learning experience for you and that my effort to make up for Post-its and stickers digitally was worthwhile. So with that, I just want to thank you. I'll hang out here if you got questions. But again, I'm happy to be a resource for you if I can in any way. Thank you all.
Thank you. And thank you all who like stuck around. I know there was a screw up with the timing and whatnot. So thank you so much. And yeah, I appreciate each and every one of you.
Indeed. Thank you so much.
It was awesome. Thanks everybody for coming, and thanks Megan. And Shannon, this was great. So
yes. Special thanks for Shannon for pinch hitting on super early in the morning to help me. It's been a joy having you and kind of like reflecting on our education. That was a kind of a fun treat too.
Thanks for the opportunity. Bye everyone.
Bye Jennifer.
Bye Jennifer.
Thank you. I'm gonna stop recording.